Sometimes things happen in life that can't be reversed, and they usually happen when you least expect it. Death will always find a way to get closer to you. And the most intriguing thing is how exactly it will do it. You can die even from someone you truly loved, and from whom you least expected a blade in the heart. As a result, life can end in an instant, even when you haven't really lived it yet. This is called fate. Luckily, this kind of thing rarely happens in the real world, and can only be experienced in video games. Nowadays, you can find quite a few games of this genre, and all of them go through a phase of careful development and fixing bugs that pop up at the most inopportune moments. One of these people, called developers, was Kim Woo-jin, who worked as a character designer. Woo-jin worked for a console game development company called REW. And since console games were not a thing in South Korea, the company's products suddenly became a big hit, and over time, it became known worldwide. The game that Woo-jin had just tested was a fairly high-budget game, and the company had now invested all of its funds and profits into it. In other words, if anything goes wrong with this game, the guys working on it are in for a rough ride, to put it mildly. The essence of this game was that its difficulty and story development depended on the player's own choices. And despite being a single-player game, it added artificial intelligence and story characters, which attracted even more attention. But the most outstanding thing about it is the abundance of different classes, such as knights, mages, explorers, demons, hunters, nobles, kings, and many others. Thanks to the updated set of roles, players are free to choose their position in the game, and simply put, if the game explodes with trends, the company will make a ton of money. Meanwhile, Woo-jin was working overtime, and the reason for this was quite peculiar. It all comes down to the main episode called Death of Declan, which was tested by Woo-jin and featured Declan von Grahan Ucklein, the head professor. Declein was one of the game's mid-bosses, also a villain, and there were countless attempts to fix the bugs due to the possible plot branches with the main character. And finally, Woo-jin managed to kill him without a single mistake, and the cause of Declan's death was a knife wound inflicted by his fiancée. Woo-jin was delighted that his tireless work had finally paid off, and everything seemed to have been planned perfectly. Just as Woo-jin was about to go home to rest, a staff member named Inwoo Ara approached him and asked how the testing was going. However, she was more than just an employee. In addition to being the head of the development team where Woo-jin worked, she was also his ex-girlfriend. They were together for 7 whole years, and all this time that they spent together was filled with real happiness. At the same time, they were slightly different. Woo-jin was extremely lazy by nature, while Ada was a workaholic from birth. Thanks to her ambition and perseverance, Woo-jin was able to become a better worker. But in the end, they broke up, and Woo-jin blamed himself for this, because despite the girl's efforts, he never changed. And 6 months later, Woo-jin found out that Ada had found someone else, which upset him greatly. So he didn't answer her question about how the testing was going, but only said that it seemed like everything was going well with her new boyfriend. Ara was surprised at how quickly gossip spread in the company. And in the meantime, she answered Woo-jin that they were indeed doing well, although it was unpleasant for him to hear this. But Ara didn't just come to him to ask how the testing was going. She asked Woo-jin to correct something, since some details had been changed again towards the end of the story. Woo-jin himself wasn't very happy with these changes, asking Ada if Declan could really be considered a boss, since he looked like some kind of weakling. Ara explained to him that this was the essence of the charm. The game and Declein, the further the scenario goes, the stronger Declein becomes, and the difficulty of the game depends on the player's personal choice. Meanwhile, she also said that the prototype for this character is Woo-jin himself, which surprised him quite a bit. Ara asked him if he hadn't noticed how similar they were, like twin brothers. And that was also the reason why she always killed him as soon as she started playing. However, Ara still wanted to ask him how the testing was going. And Woo-jin noted that the game itself was fun, but he didn't like that the fate of the entire company depended on its success. But Ara assured him that there was no need to worry about that, since the game's trailer had blown up all the charts, so their project was primed for success. However, they were unable to continue the conversation because just at that time, Ada's boyfriend drove up to the company's office and was already waiting for her by the car. After that, Ada wished him luck and left, which made Woo-jin feel like a loser to some extent. So while the rest of the staff was resting, Woo-jin continued testing the episode with Declein. He was also not thrilled with the way the artist had portrayed him. wondering if he really looked like him. Declein himself also had 6 attributes, and he also had the combination of prodigy and standard mage. When Declein was a child, he was called a genius of magic and put on a pedestal. But in reality, he was a rather mediocre magician, average among children his age. However, due to his arrogance and belonging to the nobility, he eventually became an unbearable person. However, as the story progresses, he should become even stronger, although at the moment, he is surrounded only by haters. Woojin began to think that maybe Declein should add some extra attribute or character trait, something unnoticeable. And since the character would only be modeled after Woojin, he decided to add understanding to Declan, then tycoon and Midas touch. And without stopping, he added sharp vision and Iron Man. In the end, Woojin gave him all the good traits, which made him feel uneasy, and he decided to return everything to the way it was so that there would be no problems. Woojin was about to put everything back and go rest when he suddenly received a new message. Developer Rain, the author himself, wrote to him and asked how the testing was going, to which Woojin replied that if he wanted to make changes, he could do so now. But Rain replied that he just wanted to take a look. Woojin was surprised that Rain really wanted to watch the game right now. But he said that wasn't quite the case, and asked him to look out the window. Woojin didn't quite understand what Rain was talking about, but when he looked out the window, he was extremely surprised to see how suddenly and strangely the sky had changed. He didn't understand what was happening and what kind of strange hole had formed high in the sky. At that very moment, something strange began to happen. Some powerful energy penetrated the ordinary world. At the same time, something incomprehensible began to happen to Woojin, as if someone was changing his mind, and he himself was being transported somewhere. Without realizing it, Woojin became the same Declein he had been testing all this time. He heard a previously unknown voice that said that one must always be on guard with Declein because he is someone who cannot be tamed. And even if he looks like a fragile boy now, at any moment, he can do something incredibly terrible. After all, at the moment, Declein simply underestimates himself. But the time will come when he will understand what he is truly capable of, and that he is a real villain. Woojin's reincarnation into his new body was a turbulent one, and so far all he could understand was that he had been here for several days already, and now he sleeps in his new bed day after day, which the rest of the family were not particularly happy about, not understanding why he locked himself in because of some woman. After that day with the appearance of strange clouds, he woke up in a new body, and a week has passed since then. Woojin found himself in the world of the game that he himself created, becoming Declein. He was convinced of this when he saw the painfully familiar landscape around him, and most importantly, the worst character in the entire game. A character who cannot avoid death no matter what he does. A person who is destined to die. Thus, Woojin became the villain Declein, supposedly his own real-life prototype. A week had already passed since his arrival in the new world, and he had spent all this time in his chambers at the Declein estate. At first, he thought it was all just a dream, because he had been working overtime for a long time and had not had a proper rest. But after a few days, a sense of reality forced him to admit the truth. Woojin began to wonder if he had died from that lightning strike and gone to the afterlife. But whatever the case, he knew one thing for sure. As strange as it may sound, Woojin became the villain of the game he himself developed. Moreover, Declein is the intermediate boss of this game, whom the player is destined to meet no matter which path he chooses, because he is the root of all problems, the enemy of everything and everyone, as well as the source of pain for countless characters, which made Woojin even more confused, not understanding why he, of all people, became this hero. Meanwhile, there was another problem, which was that he had no idea what part of the story he was in, and only knew the amount of mana available to him. But even that did not understand how quickly it was being used up. During the game's testing, everyone, including Woojin, tested it thousands of times. And in all those tests, Declein only survived once. He was created only as a villain who was supposed to play the role of an intermediate boss and die. Moreover, the girl who had visited him earlier brought some papers. These were Declein's own research, in which he explained the basic understanding of magic and the handling of mana. The girl's name was Uriel von Greyhon Declein. She was Declein's half-sister, and also the head of the Declein family. One interesting detail is that Uriel was not on the best terms with Declein, and the girl she mentioned then was most likely Julia, who is also Declein's fiancée. Meanwhile, before leaving, Uriel said that she would leave him all these papers, and if he did not want to lose his position as professor, he should stop crying and get down to business. On top of that, Declein is a professor, and today he has 2 lectures to teach. And the problem is that the new Declein has never taught them before. But there was something else interesting. After his rebirth, he began to see texts above his head, a kind of quest for advancement. If it weren't for Uriel, he would have continued lying in bed doing nothing. But because of her, he is forced to do something. And there are several outcomes in which Uriel becomes the cause of death. As a reward for completing the quest, he would receive plus 0.5 store currency, which was quite useful, although he still didn't understand what exactly he would be doing in the lecture. And at the same time, he worried in vain, because even earlier, Woojin had added to Declein the attribute of the unique class Understanding, the ability to understand anything, activated by mana. He previously gave Declein this attribute so that he could gain at least some empathy. And since this skill is unique and appears much later in the game itself, it most likely has hidden effects. However, he will be able to find out about this later, and now his main task is to successfully deliver the lecture. Usually, Woojin felt extremely uncomfortable in clothes like this. But now that he is in Declan's body, everything feels different, and he feels comfortable and quite elegant. In addition, another one of Declein's attributes is blackmail and nobility, as well as sense of aesthetics. And on top of that, he had the feeling that everything around him was telling him that this body now belonged to him. And on top of that, he also couldn't break the rules that Declein adhered to. After all, what previously seemed uncomfortable is now the norm for this body. And despite the fact that its main purpose remains the collection of information, this walk to the first lecture feels suspiciously natural. Now, he is no longer just a game developer whose girlfriend left him after 7 years together, but a distinguished and valuable nobleman, although for him, this was no consolation at all. Of course, Woojin is a common name for a South Korean man, but objectively, he was tall and quite attractive. And if you remember Ara's last words about him, then he is pathetic and lazy, to put it mildly. A fool. And he will never forget these words. However, his life looks different now, and perhaps because of this, he will be able to change something. However, as soon as he saw an expensive car, he immediately remembered Ada's new boyfriend, which really infuriated him. As soon as Declan got into the car, he noticed a strange young man next to him, whom he had not seen before. The young man turned out to be his assistant, who had been under his command for 3 years, and he was surprised that Declan did not recognize him. He handed him the documents, and Declan assumed they were material for a lecture, but it turned out to be a script. All the necessary information was written down in it from start to finish, since it would be strange to think that an assistant was preparing lectures himself. Declein wanted to praise his assistant, saying that he had done an excellent job. And at that moment, the space in front of him seemed to begin to distort. However, he praised the assistant for the work he had done, which surprised him. And even the driver, they could not believe that Declein had just complimented someone. Declein wondered what a disgusting person he was, since his gratitude caused such amazement in everyone. He had experienced a similar feeling when he left the estate, and it seemed that Declein's consciousness was gradually mixing with Woojin's consciousness. Meanwhile, he finally arrived at the Imperial University, Declein's workplace, and then went to the Roteo Hall mentioned in the letter. The Roteo Hall was a lecture hall where Declan himself taught, and many students were looking forward to attending his lecture. Entering the hall, he introduced himself and said that he was taking on this task as the head professor of the university's magic tower. Declein really looked quite attractive and mysterious at first glance, so almost all the girls were delighted to see him. However, not everyone liked him. Some, on the contrary, hated him so much that they wanted to kill him, because Declein was an old enemy of the father of one of the students, named Ifrin. 3 years ago, her father committed suicide, but before that, he had spent many years researching spell interpretation. And after someone extorted his dissertation, he lost heart and decided to commit suicide. The man who stole his dissertation was known to everyone as a genius spell interpreter, and that man was Declein. But then, Ifrin was not able to change anything, because after her father's death, she was left completely alone. Born into a noble family, she lost everything, including the family home and lands, becoming an ordinary orphan. Then she swore that she would certainly take revenge on Declan, and having made this oath, she entered the Imperial University, although it took a huge effort, because one of the professors there was Declan. And unlike the other students, Ifrin knew the whole truth about him and understood that all his knowledge in interpreting spells was a lie, based on her father's discoveries. Anger filled her, and she couldn't understand how, after everything he had done to destroy her family, he could stand here so shamelessly, taking the place intended for her father. She intended to reveal the whole truth right now and kill Declein, but she was forced to restrain herself, because in order to overthrow him, she needed to prepare well. And all for the sake of planning the perfect revenge and taking revenge on Declan for everything he did. At this time, Declein began his lecture, introducing himself again and also stating that he was a monarch mage who controlled the elements. There were 11 ranks among mages, and the monarch occupied the 4th. He told the students that in magic there are 3 major attributes and 9 types, among which the attributes are considered to be the primary sources that are the basis of all magic, and also elements that have a physical composition, and matter, which is something in between them. As for the types, they include summoning, spirits, destruction, support, strengthening, manipulation, flexibility, charms, and the last one is harmony. The new Declan's first lecture was going quite well, despite the fact that it was Wu Jin's first lecture and he didn't understand anything about magical theory. Everything that was happening was absolutely clear to him. Plus, blackmail and nobility makes all the students focus on him, and elitism keeps them interested and makes them maintain eye contact. And it all seems quite natural. It is safe to say that the current Declein has all the qualities of a good teacher. Meanwhile, he told the students that magicians usually store mana in their heads, in the place where it is easiest to imagine a spell. Knights accumulate mana in the heart and conduct it throughout the body using blood vessels. There is also a core where the internal mana is mixed with the external one. This is the most universal place for storing it. He wanted to convey one simple message to his students. Hard work is important, but if they don't have talent, they should make their choice very carefully and focus entirely on it. He himself didn't think that one day he would begin to give out such advice because, frankly speaking, Declein was not such a talented character. Even though his current mana reserve was 3,375 points, there was a mage in the world who had a reserve of 30,000 points. In the end, Declein gave the students advice that he himself should have heeded, and by then, the lecture was already drawing to a close. However, the last part of it looked rather dubious, and he wasn't sure whether it was worth voicing the final fragment of the script, since the old Declein would hardly have done it. In conclusion, Declein should have asked the students if they had any questions, and if it had been his old self, he would have simply declared the lecture over and left. But now, in his body, was Wu Jin, who was proud enough to ask about it. However, the students did not have any questions, which Declein was genuinely happy about. But this joy did not last long. One of the students said that a strange spell was discovered in the dorm last night, and everyone believed that the devil was behind it, after which she wanted to ask the professor's opinion. To this, Declein asked if she was really a student at the university's magic tower, reminding her that everyone was required to introduce themselves. He told her that he was not going to answer questions from a child who did not know the basic rules of etiquette, which surprised and angered the girl even more. The real reason he didn't answer her question was because the understanding skill used up too much mana. As a result, he had already spent 1,300 mana points to understand the lecture scenario, and he was terrified to imagine how much it would take to learn that spell. However, Ifrin was not going to give up and was determined to go to the very end. She asked Declein to stay for a moment, explaining that the magic tower refused to analyze the spell, considering it merely a rumor. But she was sure that it was Declein who would be able to determine its nature, because right now, several debutantes, magicians of the lower 11th rank, were unsuccessfully trying to cope with it. After that, she cast a spell and asked him to interpret it, which cost Declein 1,715 mana. Declein explained to the girl that it was a barrier magic type called Charm, and it seemed like someone was trying to catch her. After this, he announced the end of the lecture, simultaneously completing the side quest lecture at the university and receiving a reward of 0.5 store currency. As soon as the class ended, all the students went to the cafeteria, but even while eating, Ifrin couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Then, during the lecture, she used a mysterious spell to make it look like Declan's skill in interpreting magic was a lie. From the expression on Declein's face, it was clear that he was a little confused, but he still managed to make her look like a fool without any manners. However, he was able to recognize that it was barrier magic, and although it was quite complex in structure, most such spells required parameters, and determining the type without them was extremely difficult. Ifrin had simply brought with her an unidentified spell that had been painted on the dorm door the night before, and at first it had seemed to her to be a jumbled spell, as if it enhanced the searching skills of newcomers. At that moment, a friend joyfully ran up to the girl and told her that yesterday's spell on the door really turned out to be barrier magic. The friend did not hide her delight, noting that Ifrin was truly amazing because the others were afraid to ask Declein about it, but she was able to. This left Ifrin even more shocked, and she no longer understood what was happening. Ifrin had intended to make Declein look like a fool, but in doing so, she only further cemented his reputation. Meanwhile, this semester he was also giving a lecture where one had to defeat one's enemy to defeat everyone. And Ifrin saw this as a new chance to stop him. Be that as it may, her goal remained revenge on Declan, and for this, she was ready to do anything, without the slightest doubt. Declein was glad that everything went more or less smoothly, because the situation could have turned out much worse. The moment he looked at the spell, his understanding skill worked on its own, and just one glance at that complex spell circle with its intertwined lines was enough to almost completely exhaust all of his mana. But even he couldn't understand the essence of this spell, and even if he had twice as much mana, he still wouldn't have been able to decipher it. But nothing bad happened. Meanwhile, he met someone he had only seen hundreds of times on a monitor screen. White hair, light eyes, all this unmistakably pointed to her. Julia von Dea Freuden, his bride and future holder of the highest knightly title. Julia asked how he was doing, and Declein answered without hesitation that he was doing well, which made the girl quite angry. She didn't understand how he could be doing well after breaking the promise they made to each other just a week ago. But Declein had no idea what she was talking about. He replied that he didn't understand what she was talking about and tried to avoid the conversation, but Julia stopped him, asking if he was trying to run away again like he had then. Declein realized that he couldn't avoid the dialogue and asked her to remind him what promise they were talking about, citing the fact that due to his recent fever, he had completely forgotten everything. Then Declein and Julia promised each other that they would be honest, admit all the lies and deceptions they had committed so far, and that even if the world began to collapse, they would stay together forever. Julia was disappointed that Declein had forgotten such an important moment for them and only coldly said that he had not lived up to her trust. After that, as if nothing had happened, Declein moved on, and Julia could barely contain her anger. Their engagement itself was arranged for practical reasons. He is a talented magician, she is an outstanding knight. Such a union would benefit both families. The Declans and the Freudens were two noble families, and no one objected to the marriage, which was beneficial to everyone. Julia did not have any feelings for him, especially not love, but she agreed, acting in the interests of her family. However, both families soon realized that, in fact, Declein was not a talented magician at all, and it all turned out to be a fiction. Perhaps he simply did not want to admit the truth, but by calling himself a genius in interpreting spells, he deceived the whole world and even managed to become a professor. After one incident, he stopped making any progress. But the Declans and Freudens stubbornly tried to keep silent. Julia believed that it was because both families were afraid of being the subject of gossip, and no one wanted their weaknesses to become known to others. However, she could not come to terms with this, and although she was against marriages of convenience, she rejected even more strongly the lies that violated the principles of chivalry. Julia completely stopped understanding what was going on in Declein's head, who first made vows and then without hesitation broke them and avoided the conversation. In this game, the Imperial University was considered the best, and the magic department was the strongest among all existing organizations. Roughly speaking, its Korean equivalent would be Seoul National University School of Medicine, and the Magic Tower would be Seoul National University Hospital. There were many beautiful places on its territory, a huge campus and well-kept buildings, which Woojin and his colleagues took care of day and night. This made him feel a little sad, because it would be much better to enjoy this place while being in the body of another person. At that moment, a young man was running towards him and, not noticing Declein, crashed straight into him. The boy turned out to be his assistant, and at first Declein thought his name was Zorro, but the boy's name was Alan. After that, they went to the office together as Alan was in a hurry to hand over the list of sponsors for this year's new magicians. The thing is, the Magic Tower resembled a research center from the real world, and money was needed to develop magic, and the professors supported promising newcomers. While looking through the list, Declein noticed one entry that stood out in gold, and the reason for this was the presence of the rare skill Magnate, the attribute of a natural financier with an unerring sense for profitable deals. Additionally, the rare skill Sharp Vision was activated, designed to work in tandem with other qualities, allowing one to visualize intuition, attributes, mana points, and similar elements. As a result of the combination of these two skills, the selection of candidates was carried out very quickly and without any particular problems. However, one name shone brighter than the others. It was Ifrin Luna. She was one of the key characters in the game, and according to the plot, she lost her father because of Declan. What surprised him most was that Ifrin didn't have a sponsor. And when he asked Alan about it, he replied that everyone was simply afraid of her. Even though Ifrin was quite capable and was able to enter the Magic Tower even without completing the academy, she remained an enemy of Declan, or rather, he of her. Besides, if he leaves everything as is, he will eventually die and the game will be over. In the game itself, Declein can die in a variety of ways, from a sword to the heart, a stick to the head, or poisoned wine. Even the seemingly strangest thing, a bomb explosion, is also possible. Because whatever the method, the fact of his death is inevitable. And if Woojin wants to survive in Declein's body, he'll have to make a choice the original Declein would never have made. So he told Alan to send one letter and pick up a couple of books for him on the way. In order for the new Declein to survive in such a cruel game world, he will need a huge amount of money, because this is the only way to avoid numerous deaths. Investing in mages is one way to earn money, but it is still not enough. After all, this world is full of people who hate him, and each of them will try to get rid of him at any opportunity, which is why he needs to find a way to survive. And to do this, oddly enough, he will have to become much stronger. However, Declein had only mediocre talent, and with his current capabilities, he would not be able to cope with the coming threats unless he prepared properly. The only thing that can help him survive a series of deadly events is his skills. Despite his own claims, Declein is unable to control all four elements, but has the potential to manipulate earth and fire. The combination of earth, fire, and metal creates an attribute called Midas Touch, which consumes the user's mana to unlock the target's potential. Thus, Declein's talent for metal manipulation allows him to use levitating blades controlled by chi. And although it sounds impressive, in reality it is ordinary telekinesis, which is not very common in this world. But through manipulation of metal, Declan will be able to compensate for weaknesses. But to do this, he needs to understand how it all works. So first, he decided to study the theory in order to master the manipulation of objects. After reading a bit, Declein understood some things, and the time came to test everything in practice. Then he felt the materials and foundations of basic telekinesis spells seem to flow directly into his mind. After this, he finally managed to lift the object using telekinesis, and he remembered everything about its use, eliminating the need to cast a spell. He couldn't even imagine that he would ever see with his own eyes what had previously existed only in character settings. However, basic telekinesis alone is not enough, and even advanced telekinesis will not provide the required level of power. That's why he started to think about what if he covered his entire body with magic circles, since the power of the circle directly depends on its area. Thus, if he studies his body with understanding, he will be able to apply magic circles not only to his skin, but also to his brain, heart, and even his inner core, enhancing his telekinesis. Of course, his body may be overloaded or suffer side effects, but thanks to the Iron Man attribute, which grants innate physical endurance, he will be able to endure it. In this world, only he is capable of such a thing, and although he currently only has 800 mana points, this should be enough for a small experiment. And soon, everything around was again filled with a bright blue glow, from which incredible power emanated. For Declein, it was a terrible pain that could not be compared to anything else. The feeling that every bone was broken and every muscle was torn, and yet he had to endure it. He remained determined and confident, without uttering a single groan. For such is the duty of a nobleman. In the end, it all ended rather quickly. and Declein used up all his mana, feeling extremely exhausted. Even though he failed due to lack of mana, he realized something. There was now a magic circle on his shoulder, and at this rate, it would take about 2 weeks to cover the entire body. A whole month had already passed since the day of Declein's first lecture, and the first day of school had arrived, beginning with Professor Declein's class. Arriving at the lesson location, the students were quite surprised to see a sign informing them that the professor wanted to test their abilities using local elements. This caused confusion among the students, since Declein was not around, and they decided that it was someone's prank. Ifrin wasn't thrilled either, but she had fully expected this, as Declein was an irresponsible person. At that moment, she was pushed by an unknown girl who seemed to have known Ifrin before, but now did not recognize her. It turned out to be Sylvia von Josephine Ilade, whom Ifrin remembered from an unpleasant episode in the past, but decided not to start a conversation with her. After this, Ifrin set off to explore the area and fulfill the conditions of the task, all the while remembering that strange meeting. The thing is, 10 years ago, fearing Ifrin's father and her potential, the Ilade family sent an army to surround their estate and intimidate them. Ifrin couldn't believe that after everything that had happened, Sylvia really didn't remember her. Suddenly, her formation was destroyed, and Ifrin felt something draining her mana. Looking to the side, she saw Sylvia, who had built a castle several times larger than her own. A disgruntled Ifrin approached Sylvia to ask her what she was planning and why she took all the mana that she had collected herself. However, Sylvia simply ignored Ifrin, which made her quite angry. So Ifrin decided to go to extremes and remind Sylvia of their long-ago meeting, asking why she was pretending not to know her. Even though Sylvia continued to pretend she didn't know her, Ifrin didn't back down and reminded her of how, many years ago, their family had intimidated her relatives and forced them to give up magic. She then asked Sylvia if she really thought Ifrin was there just to steal her glory, to which she replied that she had no idea who she was. However, Sylvia said that she remembered her father, a brash former nobleman. As soon as she mentioned this and said that he was dead, Ifrin seemed to change before our eyes. Ifrin did not hold back and wanted to teach Sylvia a lesson for her dirty words about her father. And all the students watched this scene. She then attacked Sylvia, who tried to defend herself with a shield, and after their collision, a powerful explosion was heard. Sylvia begged to let her go, but Ifrin demanded an apology for insulting her father and was ready to kill her, if not for one thing. Suddenly, a strange light appeared before them, from which powerful energy emanated, and with each passing moment, the mysterious circle drew closer and closer. It turned out to be a void formed at the site of the collision of Ifrin and Sylvia's mana, which began to absorb everything around. The boys started running away from her as fast as they could, but the void exploded like a bomb. Ifrin tried to defend herself with a shield, when suddenly, she noticed that everything around her had become unexpectedly quiet, and the emptiness had disappeared. At that moment, Declein appeared and stopped all the exploding debris right in the air. When Declein used telekinesis, the students' admiring cries were heard all around. Since they had just started training, they could not resist the beauty of this magic. It was the magic of amplification, the dazzling aspect of which could not be denied. After such a brilliant performance, Declein announced the end of the lesson and said that everyone could go free, except for Sylvia and Ifrin, who had caused all this commotion. After this, Declein went with them to the interrogation room to find out what happened. Professor Ratlin of the Faculty of Spiritual Studies and Professor Relin of the Faculty of Support were already waiting for them there. Besides them, the chairperson of the university's Magic Tower, Adelina Sigelian, was also present. Those present were quite surprised that someone would dare to attack a lady from the Ilade family, and were displeased that it was done by a commoner who had not studied at the academy. Raylan noted that he had heard about how Professor Declan had managed to resolve the situation, and his words were confirmed by Ratlin. Declein understood perfectly well that all of this was blatant flattery, since the professors had long been acquainted with high society, and the outcome of this trial was already predetermined. After all, Sylvia is the daughter of the influential Ilade family, and most likely no one will punish her. But Ifrin is a fallen noblewoman, essentially a commoner, and it's not hard to guess whose side the professors will take. However, Declein was determined to change the course of this meeting. This is because a little earlier, he noticed a strange crimson energy emanating from Ifrin, and thanks to sharp vision, only he could see it, and this is a sign of the manifestation of villain's fate. If Declein fails to change the outcome, he will be one step closer to his own death. However, the disciplinary meeting got off to a bad start, to put it mildly. An angry Relin demanded an explanation from Ifrin as to why she had started a fight at the university. However, no matter how much Ifrin wanted to, she couldn't answer this question. The thing is that right now, Declan, her main enemy, was watching her, which is why she couldn't voice the true reason. Ifrin was sure that Sylvia had deliberately insulted her father, but she couldn't say it in front of Declein. This made Relin even more furious, and he asked if she had simply decided to take her anger out on Sylvia. Sylvia explained that she had accidentally destroyed her work during class, which had caused the altercation. Her words only made Ifrin's situation worse. Relin was furious that a commoner would start a fight over such nonsense, especially if Sylvia hadn't done it on purpose. Following this, the question of Ifrin's expulsion from the university for inappropriate behavior was raised. Ifrin could no longer bear this stream of accusations. At a regular disciplinary meeting, all the indignation fell on her, and she could not object. Plus, she had no one to stand up for her, which made her hate Declein even more. Adelina agreed with the opinion of the others, but still wanted to hear out Declan first, since he was directly involved in the incident. Hearing this, Ifrin completely lost hope of staying at the university. However, she was very surprised when the first thing Declein asked Sylvia was whether she really believed that she was not to blame for what happened. This question surprised even the professors, and no one could understand where it was leading. Declein added that it was obvious to him that either Sylvia wanted to prevent the incident but didn't do so, or her abilities were greatly exaggerated, and she simply couldn't intervene. After this, Sylvia admitted that she really didn't stop her because she wanted Ifrin to get more punishment. At this time, Ifrin was perplexed, not understanding why Declein was questioning Sylvia instead of her, since, no matter how you look at it, she was the one to blame. Raylan also decided not to remain silent, saying that it is not the one who defends himself who is at fault, but the one who attacks. Declein replied that if the context is so important to him, then he could also be considered the culprit of this incident, since he was the initiator of the lesson. Ifrin completely stopped understanding what was happening and why Declan stood up for her, and even refuted the professor's position, who sided with Sylvia. Was Declan really trying to protect her now? However, Adelina intervened in the argument between the two professors, saying that it was common for children to quarrel as they grew up, and besides, they had only just become debutantes. So instead of looking for someone to blame, she suggested that they close their eyes for the first time. After which, Relin expressed his admiration for Declein, saying that he expected nothing less from him. He analyzed the situation perfectly. Declein ignored his words and was about to go about his business when suddenly, someone asked him to wait. That someone, oddly enough, was Ifrin. She wanted to ask Declan if he remembered Luna's family and her father. Then, did he know that it was because of him that he suffered for the rest of his life, until he decided to commit suicide? Despite all of Ifrin's expectations, Declein said that she shouldn't waste her potential on something that was in the past. So she didn't have to ask that question. This made Ifrin feel even more uneasy, because, as she thought, Declein knew both her and her father. Otherwise, there was no other way to explain his decision to help her out in this way, and he must have simply felt some kind of responsibility. Ifrin began to think that perhaps he was doing this only out of pity for her. In some ways, it was a relief to her, because Declein hadn't forgotten her and still remembered her, and that was enough for her, at least for now. Declein, for successfully completing the quest, The Fate of a Villain, Overcome the Variable of Death, received a whopping 2 store currencies. Sylvia also told her father, the head of the Ilade family, a third-rank Esper mage, the famous Giltheon von Ludwig Ilade, about what happened during class at the university. Giltheon noted that his daughter had nothing to worry about, because even if Ifrin had talent, she still missed her chance. But Sylvia didn't think so. What happened reminded her of how they first met, 10 years ago, during the entrance exam to the academy. Then everyone was surprised that they both had Archmage-level talent, which caused a huge commotion. This is because Archmages are at the pinnacle of the magical world, earning them the nickname Eternals, beings that even the Emperor himself cannot compare to. Those who manage to reach this level are called Archmages, and their names are written into the history of the continent. However, according to established rules, there can only be 3 Archmages in one era. Their type or specialty does not matter at all, because among magicians, this rule remains unchanged. At the moment, apart from Demerkin's seat, there are 2 seats left vacant, but one of them will most likely go to Adelina. In other words, Sylvia, the heir to the Alade family, and Ifrin, the heir to a collateral branch of their family, had to compete for the remaining spot. Even though Sylvia's father didn't explain anything to her, she understood everything without words. That day, Sylvia learned that the Alade family had trampled the Luna family, just because of her. This was done in order to secure her place as Archmage, and Sylvia herself was not against it. However, the words and thoughts about Ifrin did not give her peace, and she did not understand whether she would bother her again in the future. Meanwhile, her father also asked her to be wary of Declan, because he is not as simple as he seems at first glance. And all they know about him is that he was called a child prodigy in childhood. Sylvia herself understood that she had to be wary of Declein, because back then, during the skirmish with Ifrin, he had seen through her trap. She was sure that at that moment she had made Ifrin's mana disappear and also set up a trap that would explode upon contact with her mana. And the stronger her blow was, the more trouble she would get into. But Declein saw through her plan immediately. Even though she checked for any signs of magical surveillance in the room itself, he still forced everyone to come to a compromise instead of blaming her for everything. It was as if he was telling her that he knew everything she had done and was asking her to play along with him. It was a threat that Sylvia could not help but accept. At first, she thought that Declein was an ordinary, arrogant professor whose talents were slightly above average. But she was deeply mistaken, which made her feel uneasy. After that, Declein aroused her interest, and she wanted to know who he really was. Several days have passed since then, and Declein has never regretted his decision to support Ifrin, because thanks to this, he managed to avoid the inevitable death, and he also received store currency. He also couldn't have imagined that the student who asked that question would turn out to be Ifrin, although at that time, she was extremely hostile towards him. Declein thought that perhaps Sylvia might hold a grudge against him because of what happened, but he simply had no other choice. Now he's heading to a social event, and while he'd rather avoid them, he can't pass up the opportunity to earn some extra store currency. Additionally, access to the shop requires at least 5 currencies, so Declein needs to keep a close eye on the characters present at the Flower of the New City event. Upon arrival at the venue, Declein was greeted with honor, like a professor. Everywhere you looked, there were a lot of high-ranking aristocrats, as well as many rather familiar faces. He was most surprised to see Ihelm, whom Woojin had modeled himself. But at that moment, a man approached him, who was extremely glad to see him and wanted to talk to him, since his son just happened to attend his lectures. However, as soon as everyone heard Declein's name, a crowd of people rushed towards him, wanting to talk, which he was not particularly happy about. At this point, something more interesting happened for Declein. He heard someone in the audience express their admiration for Lady Ganesha's achievements at the Continental magazine, after which Declein immediately went in search of Ganesha and wanted to meet her as soon as possible. But, unfortunately, he could not find her in any way, trying to remember where he heard her mentioned. At that moment, Ganesha was watching him from the 2nd floor. She herself was not just an adventurer, but the 5th most powerful character at the beginning of the story. After looking around a bit, Declein was finally able to see her and was about to approach her. However, his plans were interrupted by Ihelm, who wanted to talk to him since the last time they saw each other was quite a long time ago. Ihelm von Garion Rewind himself was an imperial elite mage monarch of the 4th strongest rank. And to be more precise, he didn't so much want to talk to him as to provoke him, reproaching Declein for not having made any progress in his research over the past 3 years. Ihelm was once a colleague of Declein's at the university, and they were once close. But after Declein received the position of chief professor, Ihelm harbored a grudge against him. Perhaps this provocation on his part could have influenced the original Declein, but to Woojin, it seemed meaningless. And yet, Ihelm was right, because such rumors did indeed circulate. Additionally, while he was talking to Ihelm, Ganesha suddenly disappeared, causing Declein to be slightly irritated. After which, Declein expressed a couple of his less than flattering wishes to Ihelm and left, asking him to leave him alone. For the rest of the time, Declein wandered around the area trying to find Ganesha, but everything was in vain, and he already thought that his plan had failed. However, as soon as he went out onto the balcony to breathe some fresh air, he saw Ganesha standing there and was pleasantly surprised. Ganesha also pretended to be surprised by their sudden meeting, asking Declein if he had been looking for her all this time. Declein replied that he was just a little lost, but Ganesha, laughing, said that she knew he was looking for her because he had something to tell. Ganesha also apologized for that mission, saying that she had returned the deposit and the penalty to him, so she asked him to turn a blind eye to it for the first and last time. That very mission was to bring Declein a child with magical talent. This is another dark page in the villain's life. Ganesha also said that, in truth, she did not want to give him the child at all, because she had become too attached to her. The thing is that old Declein tried to compensate for his shortcomings with the help of a talented child, and therefore asked Ganesha to find such children. Meanwhile, Ganesha also had a question she wanted to ask Declein: how long he intended to live this kind of life. This made him think a little, because old Declan happily accepted praise from those who were of no use, who had destroyed all connections and wounded many for the sake of his glory. Therefore, in response to Ganesha's question, Declein replied that he would now live differently. One could say that he was starting a new life. Ganesha was quite surprised, because she certainly did not expect such an answer, and was prepared for the fact that he would try to kill her for failing the secret mission. Declein was very surprised by what he heard, because how could he possibly resist a girl with the highest level of combat abilities? Woojin wasn't sure about the original Declein, but Ganesha wasn't called the one who could kill with a single swipe of her hair for nothing. She possesses the attributes of invulnerable body and master of all martial arts, and is also a warrior and adventurer who has reached the peak of physical strength. Because Woojin now occupied Declein's body, he most likely didn't have time to send assassins after her. Otherwise, she would have already been dead. While he himself had imagined it differently, he nevertheless managed to achieve his goal at this networking event. Now, seeing no point in staying, Declein decided to leave, saying goodbye to Ganesha. Ganesha also asked him if everything was absolutely all right and whether she should expect any assassination attempts, to which he replied that it was absolutely tasteless and left. As Ganesha said, Declein could have used the power of the Euclins to exert pressure through the guild, but that would have created more variables leading to his death. At that moment, he also completed the quest, but it said that he avoided, not prevented, the death variable, meaning he should be more careful. Also present at the event was Riley, Julia's relative and a 12th rank rookie adventurer. At this time, she tried to persuade Julia to take a walk around the area with her, but she refused, saying that she didn't want to come there in the first place. Riley then asked her how things were with that man, without mentioning Declan's name. Riley admitted to Julia that she heard about what happened, and it makes her worried about her. Julia replied that things were bad, and at that moment, turning around, she saw Declein coming down the stairs. However, Declein pretended not to notice her and decided to leave the event, which greatly surprised those present because everyone knew how much he loved such meetings. Moreover, no one could help but notice that he didn't even look in the direction of his fiancée, Julia, which gave rise to new rumors. As a result of Declein leaving the event earlier than usual, people assumed that the reason was his rift with Julia. Woojin himself, in Declein's body, was unaware of his tastes. But after leaving the event, he completed the quest and earned some store currency. A week has passed since Declein attended the Flower of the New City event. During this time, in addition to daily exercise and basic telekinesis training, he realized that he lacked stamina and began physical training. The reason for this was that he had recently almost died. A couple of days ago, when he tried to use a more powerful spell again, something unexpected happened. And if he were an ordinary magician, he would certainly have died. But he survived only thanks to the Iron Man attribute. After meeting Ganesha, he wanted even more power and tried to enhance his metal manipulation by adding fire control to his telekinesis, which he placed on his body. During this upgrade, he attempted to transfer the spell's essence into telekinesis, a method that would shorten the time it took to learn magic, but it came at a price. So, given the amount of stress he puts on his body, he realized how important physical training is. After that, Declan's life changed a little. Now, every morning began with training, after which he went to work. Alan was already waiting for him near the office, hurrying to give him a letter from the Magic Tower. And the sender turned out to be the qualification board for professors of the Magic Tower, which slightly unnerved Declein. The letter informed him of a formal hearing regarding the results of his current research, which would take place in 6 months, and the panel wanted him to prepare all the relevant documents. And since they decided to hold a formal hearing, That means Declein's research had reached a dead end long before Woojin took over. In the game itself, Declein has always been a professor. And if the quest requires him to remain one, then losing his position could be the point of no return. So he really hoped that he would be able to find at least something in Declein's laboratory. However, when he entered inside, he saw nothing but chaos. It felt as if no one had been here for a long time, and it was unlikely that it would have been in such a terrible state if old Declan had at least occasionally looked in here. As he wandered around the lab, he noticed that the pile of rubbish on the floor looked slightly unnatural. He was sure that someone had left this pile of trash here for a reason, and thanks to his telekinesis skill, Declan was able to pick it up without touching it. Under a pile of rubbish was a book in which all the research results were encrypted so that no one could steal them. However, for someone with the understanding skill, deciphering the entries in the book was no problem at all. Following this, a blinding golden light appeared around, most likely due to the fact that the research was simply incredible, and thanks to the combination of magnate and sharp vision, Declein realized that this was a real diamond. However, old Declein never managed to finish the research. Some pages were torn out, there were gaps in some places, and in some places there was a completely incorrect theoretical part. But even so, the magnate considered him a genius. But what surprised him most was that among the pages he found a pendant with a photograph of Ifrin and her father. From this, he realized that Father Ifrin was trying to hide this work while continuing to work for Declein as a researcher. The Luna family's mages themselves hated Declein, because it was because of him that Ifrin had to endure all the hardships of life. However, the new Declein was already determined to complete this research with the help of understanding, and if he really succeeded in doing so, he would include Father Ifrin's name as a co-author. At the same time, a couple of guys gathered in the campus coffee shop, or rather, commoners who wanted to prove their worth. Ifrin was also with them. Even though she was previously a noblewoman, now she has neither a home nor land, so she is considered a commoner. The other guys wanted Ifrin to become a representative of the common people, because she also suffered at the hands of Sylvia. The guys also wanted to create their own club for their activities, but this required the professor's permission, and it was unlikely that anyone at the university would agree to this. They considered asking Professor Relin or Carmel, but they quickly remembered that they were staunch opponents of the commoners. So they decided that it would be a good idea to ask Ifrin to talk to Declein. Ifrin herself didn't quite understand how it all came to this. The boys thought that Declan was the best option for them because he was a fairly fair professor and equally despised both nobles and commoners. And besides, he protected Ifrin. Ifrin didn't really want to talk to Declein, despite all the guys' persuasion. After this, Ifrin decided to simply run away, saying that she had things to do. But the guys did not give up and continued trying to persuade her. Suddenly, Julia, who was running after her, stopped and grabbed Ifrin's hand, and she didn't understand what was happening. However, when she looked up, she saw that Declan was standing right in front of her. However, Declein himself did not react to this meeting in any way, but simply walked past. Ifrin still decided to ask the professor to sign permission to create the club, which made her very nervous. She also apologized for the disturbance, explaining that the other professors would never approve of a commoners club. However, Ifrin worried in vain, because Declein was not at all against it, and, taking the piece of paper, signed it, telling Ifrin to send all the details regarding the club to his office later. This came as a real shock to Ifrin. She couldn't believe that Declein agreed so easily. On the one hand, she was happy, but on the other, she did not understand the professor's motives and the reasons for his kindness. After this, the guys went to a lecture by Declein in which he talked about understanding pure elements. Ifrin kept thinking about what had happened, trying to understand why Declan treated her like this. Perhaps it was guilt or even sympathy. Besides, it was he who drove her father to suicide, and it is difficult for her to believe in the sincerity of his actions. But if he really realizes his guilt, then Ifrin wants him to confess to what he did. Julia, watching Ifrin, became worried and asked if everything was okay, telling her not to pay attention to others, but Ifrin did not immediately understand what was being said. Turning around, she saw that Sylvia was sitting at the next desk, and next to her was a friend who looked at Ifrin with disdain and constantly whispered something about her. After that incident in class, it's safe to say that Ifrin became public enemy number one for all the nobles. But it wasn't just the atmosphere that had changed. It seemed as if Declein's lectures themselves had changed, as this time he talked about magic circles, emphasizing that every detail in them was significant. He explained to the students that even 2 strokes could change the color of a spell, and that today they would learn a spell called Fluid Flame. Ifrin's feelings were correct. Previously, Declein had given lectures only for the sake of status, but the classes taught by Woojin were a true demonstration of magic. With his creativity, he helped students understand the material better, and all the newcomers who attended his lectures were amazed. The same thing happened to Sylvia, who had long forgotten the joy of learning because of her innate genius. Declein also noted that the magic circle he shows is for summoning water, but if you combine it with a fire circle, you get a very interesting reaction. The flames, like water, began to flow across the surface, as if they had merged into one. The spectacle was truly breathtaking, and the students could not take their eyes off the beauty of magic. Most magicians who are considered geniuses use intuition when casting spells, and theory is just a form for them. And if all magicians relied only on theory, the magic of this world would become formulaic and monotonous. This is quite logical, because if you get too hung up on theory, there will be no time left for the magic itself. Trying to understand it only through theory is extremely ineffective, because then there will not be enough time for practice. And this is the paradox of magic. To become an elite magician, one must develop intuition. But even the elite cannot explain its nature. Giving a lecture focused on theory is almost impossible for someone whose reputation as a genius is in doubt. However, this approach appealed to the students, and many tried to listen more attentively to Declein. After the lecture, Ifrin went to the dormitory, and when she approached the door, she saw a lot of insults directed at her. She also noticed a letter under the door, or rather, a sponsorship certificate. However, she decided that it was someone's prank, since neither the Alad family nor Declan would sponsor her. But she thought that complaining about the fake would benefit her because she could get a reward for it. She went to the magical administration and was shocked to learn that the certificate was genuine. This not only surprised Ifrin, but also made her very happy, because she did not know who had decided to support her. However, she wondered who would dare to sponsor such a troubled student. Out of nervousness, she packed an emergency suitcase, fearing that someone would find out about her 100,000 eln. That's 100 million won. This amount really scared her, and she even began to suspect the office employee of attempting to steal. Yet, Ifrin was happy because someone had finally recognized her talent, and that became a strong motivation. Meanwhile, Declein went to the Treasure Island auction, which Uriel was not at all happy about. It was all because he had spent 10 million there last year, and she wasn't going to forgive him for the new problems. He arrived in the city of Luton, where the famous auction was taking place, hoping to buy a long-desired item. When he first chose telekinesis as his primary magic, he realized he was missing a special metal. He currently uses a wooden steel object, but this is only a temporary measure, and today, the very thing he needs was put up for auction. As a respected nobleman, he headed to the VIP room, where he unexpectedly met Julia, a meeting he would have liked to avoid. Julia wasn't thrilled about his appearance either, but she decided not to ignore him. She said she hoped he was doing well, as she had heard him send 2 young mages to disciplinary proceedings. Declein replied that this was no longer news, and asked if she was trying to accuse him of something. Julia explained that they were newcomers and asked if he was really ready to ruin their dreams. She added that one day he would have to answer for everything, and this was her last advice to him: not to repeat old mistakes. These words became a farewell and meant that Julia wanted to completely cut off all ties with him. This ending suited both Declein and Woojin, since he didn't want to get married, even in real life. Moreover, there are too many variables associated with it, including death, and he could die even on his wedding day. He was surprised that Julia came to the auction because she is not one to show interest in such events. So he asked if she had come here just to talk to him. These words angered her even more, and she said that he thought too highly of himself and that she had come for something for herself. Realizing that the conversation had been a mistake, he said that he understood everything and asked her not to continue, although he found her behavior sweet. At that moment, a strange feeling came over him, because just now, he was thinking about the danger of being near Julia. Woojin began to wonder if Declein's emotions were influencing him, even though he was trying to control the body's owner's personality. At this time, the announcement was made that the auction would soon begin, but Woojin was more concerned about what he felt. However, he decided to cast aside his doubts and went to the event. The first lot was an oriental vase, created by a master from the Far East. At first glance, she looked simply beautiful. But Declein noticed a golden light emanating from her, like the work of Ifrin's father. The participants began to name their bets, but no matter the amount, the light did not go out, indicating its true value. Since he had enough funds, he decided to put aside the required amount and invest the rest, since he had 205 million Elni in his account. He ended up purchasing the rough arena ring for 3 million, the Lucho scissors for 2.1 million, and the ancient rune necklace for 4.3 million. Julia, watching this, thought that he just wanted to attract attention to himself and did not believe that he was spending so much for the sake of self-love. She also did not understand why he did not realize the beauty of modesty. But she had not come for that, but for the winter fire. After some time, the final bid came, and it turned out to be winter fire, an ore used to create many of the finest swords in the Empire's history. More precisely, it was a snowfire stone that both Julia and Declein were aiming at the same time. This is because the snowfire stone is one of the 10 rarest metals in this world. It is used to create weapons and simultaneously contains the energies of cold and heat. The only thing better suited for making swords than this metal are legendary materials like dragon bones. Therefore, the snowfire stone is the highest quality material available to Declein that he can obtain. However, he was not the only one who thought so, because Julia was also determined to get this stone. After this, the participants began to announce bets, and Julia, number 1089, offered a price of 30 million Eln. With no one daring to outbid her, the host was about to announce the victory of participant 1089, and Julia was beaming with joy. But suddenly participant number 777 offered 31 million to Elne, and, strangely enough, it turned out to be Declein. Julia became even more angry with him, no longer able to ignore his behavior. At the same time, she didn't understand why Declan was doing all this. Did he really want to attract her attention? The bids rose to 33 million Elni, and the man next to Declein asked if he was going to give the stone to his fiancée. He said it would be romantic, but he should still let her buy the gift herself. Only now did Declein realize that all this time he had been competing with Julia. He realized that the stone could be important to her, and if he bought it, she might hold a grudge. But he still needed the stone. This is the first time this stone has appeared at auction in 3 years, and it is unknown when the opportunity will arise again. So even though it was a risk, he decided to do everything to get the Snowfire Stone for himself. As a result, Declein became the new owner of the Snowfire Stone with a final bid of 42 million Eln. The other participants discussed what had happened, deciding that Declein had bought the stone specifically to give it to Julia. But Julia was unhappy with both the rumors and the outcome, and was extremely angry because it reminded her of the events of last year. Julia values modesty, and Declein loves everything flashy and that which attracts attention. On the day of their engagement, he showered her with jewelry, and that day became the worst day of her life. It was as if he wanted to force her into marriage and make her acknowledge his superiority, which only increased her disgust and fear. And while Declein felt like a king, confident in his gesture, Julia saw only humiliation in this luxury. That's why she simply walked out of that room that day, thus breaking off the engagement. But it didn't end there. Soon, dirty rumors began to spread that she was with him only for profit. Then Julia immediately understood who was behind this, and she could not return to such a person, much less fall in love with him. She was about to leave the auction when she suddenly saw Declan heading towards her and was slightly surprised. Declein calmly asked if she also wanted to buy the Snowfire Stone. This question only made her angrier, and she couldn't believe that even after everything, he continued to tease her. However, instead of ridiculing her or offering to come back, Declein simply apologized to her. Julia couldn't believe her ears. Had the arrogant Declein just apologized? After that, he immediately left, and Julia began to wonder what exactly he apologized for. For the stone or something else? Because the Declein she knew did not apologize. These thoughts did not leave her, but she did not dare ask him directly, because her older sister was already waiting for her. It was Josephine, the eldest daughter of the Frieden family, who had just arrived at the auction to pick up Julia. Declein, returning home, also thought about what had happened, especially the fact that Julia was furious, but the death variable never appeared. And Woojin was curious to see how much Julia hated Declein that she even decided to kill him. When he entered the estate, he was surprised to see how worried all the servants were. The reason for this was the appearance of Uriel, who was very angry at Declein. She demanded an explanation as to why he had spent all this money, since it was intended to pay for the mines, and he himself had promised not to touch it. At that moment, Declein realized why he had so much money, and realized his carelessness. He tried to convince Uriel that everything was fine and he had bought something that would make them a profit, but she didn't want to listen to him. Uriel was furious and asked why he treated her like a trash can, expecting her to always clean up after him. After all, they were barely coping as it was. She and all the workers were trying their best to stay afloat, and he just went and spent it all. Uriel lost her temper and couldn't control her emotions, not understanding how anyone could be so irresponsible. The situation worsened, and at that moment, the villain's fate was activated. But besides that, he noticed a golden light in her red aura, the same one that appears when the magnate is activated. This means that if he fails to cope with the situation, he will die. But if he does cope, he will receive a huge benefit. He tried to calm Uriel down, telling her there was nothing to worry about, but she didn't believe a word he said, convinced that she always had to pay for his antics. Besides, it was because of him that she was never able to enter university, and she still hasn't dated anyone because since the death of her parents, all he did was mindlessly spend their money. And today he spent a whole 150 million elni. Declein didn't know how to calm Uriel down, so he declared that he would give her the position of head of the family. After this, Uriel instantly became happy and forgot about everything that had happened earlier. Her anger vanished as if by magic. However, she also wondered if he had hit his head for being willing to do such a thing, especially since Declein was willing to take a mage's oath so that she would believe him. In the end, Uriel trusted him and said that if he lied or took back his words, she would definitely kill him. After this, Uriel left, and Declan overcame another death variable and earned 2 store currencies. Declein felt a huge sense of relief, and even more so, the Woojin in his body. Because if he continued to change one thing after another, he would be able to get out of the game. At that moment, Ganesha suddenly appeared, which greatly surprised Declein. The girl was pleasantly surprised that Declan's words about wanting to change turned out to be more than just empty chatter. Declein was surprised by such an unexpected visit, to which Ganesha replied that she was simply passing by and could not miss such a sight. Declein noted that this was not surprising, since Uriel would be much better suited to the role of head of the family than he was. However, Ganesha had something completely different in mind, since Uriel's blood does not contain a drop of Declein blood. This surprised Woojin even more in Declein's body, as he didn't remember anything like this happening in the game. Uriel was created as a character who was Declan's half-sister, and he knew that she was not his biological sister. However, was it really true that there was not a drop of Declein blood in her that could connect her to their family? This was the first time he had heard this. Ganesha asked Declein if he was sure of his decision, since it was he who asked to find out whether they were blood relatives. Understanding what was going on, Declein replied that no matter what, Uriel was still the same Uriel, which surprised Ganesha even more. Ganesha noted that, in that case, his sister's secret was under her protection, so he had nothing to worry about. Before leaving, she shared a rumor that the 6 snakeheads had begun to act. The 6 snakeheads are the leaders of the continent's most notorious criminal organizations, each with a bounty of several million. Ganesha also revealed that their target was the items purchased at the last auction, and even if they were delivered, they needed to be on guard upon arrival at the estate. After she left, Declein wondered if she had told him all this information for nothing. However, this didn't change anything because Woojin was in his body, and his attitude towards Uriel wouldn't change whether she was a blood relative or not. No matter what, Uriel will always be Declein's sister, so this truth must be hidden. Ganesha returned to her squad and told them how much Declan had changed, as if he had been replaced. She admitted that after such speeches, even in such a scoundrel, you begin to see a person, to which one of the members said that she simply cannot resist handsome men. Ganesha didn't like this opinion. A small fight broke out between them, at which point Riley came up and asked if humanity had really appeared in Declein. Ganesha noted that there was no need to keep an eye on him now, and wanted to ask if he was still looking for a magical slave. But it seemed he was no longer looking. Meanwhile, the Red Garnet Adventure Group set off further on their journey. In addition, Ganesha asked the squad to keep the secret concerning the Declein family a secret. The next day, Declan finally opened the system store, but he still didn't have enough currency to buy anything useful. The system store allows you to use currency to improve stats, and you can strengthen not only your own, but also other characters. There are a few ways to use the system shop, and by mid-game, there will be 6 of them. It's not that the player can only use the shop once per level, and the fact is that with each increase in level, the currency required is double. Declein's routine already includes daily training, practicing physical skills, studying levitating blades controlled by chi, and the like. But compared to famous villains, he still lacks strength, and now he desperately needs mana quality improvement. At this time, Alan came to his office and brought a fresh issue of a magazine for wizards. There was a notice about the search for Lockheart, a mage killer who had been seen on the outskirts. So mages are urging residents to be careful. Lockheart poses the biggest threat to the mages in the first quarter of the game, and his appearance has alerted Declein. However, he didn't pose much of a threat to the current Declein, so he didn't worry. He also told Alan not to worry, and warned that he would be in the library if anything happened. Before leaving, he asked Alan if he wanted to become a junior professor, and Alan, of course, answered in the affirmative. This greatly surprised Alan, since Declein had previously said that he did not have enough talent for such a position. In a sense, this was true. But since a letter had arrived from the university demanding the selection of a junior professor, Declan decided that it would be Alan, and presented him with a bracelet with the Declein emblem. Alan was extremely grateful, as he had excellent skills in organizing paperwork and running errands, so he would definitely be useful. The previous assistants couldn't stand Declan's cruelty and ran away from him. But Alan, on the contrary, continued to carry out all his orders. And who knows, perhaps he too was already planning to escape. In addition, he gave the young man some money, saying that today he could leave early and buy himself something for dinner. Alan was simply delighted by how much Declein had changed lately, as if he had become a completely different person. Declein, however, headed to the staff library, and the reason for his visit was to investigate Keegan Luna, Ifrin's father. Those papers talked about the invention of pure elements, but there were too many errors and gaps in them. So Declein had to complete this research on his own. Plus, it would be nice to stumble upon some useful grimoire related to manipulation. Meanwhile, as he walked past the bookshelves, he noticed someone who shouldn't be in the staff library at all. That someone turned out to be Sylvia, and upon seeing her, Declein immediately asked what she was doing there. 10 minutes before her meeting with Declein, Sylvia received permission to access the staff library, explaining that she needed materials for research. Although the library was strictly reserved for staff, Relin allowed her to go there because Sylvia was the heir of the Elade family, and also this year's debutante, so the restrictions did not apply to her. Sylvia studied languages and literature as a hobby, and came to the library specifically to find materials that combined both topics. The novel she found was written in Etenel, the language of the elves, and after their disappearance, its value increased, making books in Etenel very rare. It was for this reason that Sylvia decided to visit the staff library, and of course, she did not think that she would run into Declein in such a place. Declein asked her if one meeting with the disciplinary committee wasn't enough for her. Sylvia replied that she had come in search of one specific document and had received permission from Professor Relin in advance. To this, Declein replied that this would mean that Relin had ignored the university's rules, and the librarian had simply turned a blind eye to it, in which case they would also deserve punishment. Meanwhile, he also became curious about why Sylvia had come here, and realizing that it was an Etenel affair, he asked if that was really why she had broken the rules. Sylvia was pleasantly surprised that he knew about this language, but then came to her senses and said that she was simply interested in literature and languages. After that, Declein gave her the book back and said that he would turn a blind eye to it, but only this once. However, if she came here again without permission, she would be subject to disciplinary action. So if she really wanted those books, she should send someone else next time. Declein's words made Sylvia feel uneasy, because he had just directly humiliated her. Sylvia didn't understand the point of this whole conversation, because she just wanted to understand the elves through novels written in Etenel. She also wondered how he was able to read the Etenel, as the elven language was extremely fickle, making it difficult to read. After this, the students and several professors went to practical training. Relin was surprised at how skilled the children were, and Ratlin added that they looked calm, as if even the darkness was no threat to them. The training took place on Mount Darkness, which is located near the university. This mountain is of great importance to the Magic Tower, and strict security controls are in place there. The local forest serves both as a training ground for practice and as a rich repository of magical materials. Because of this, the area is at high risk of attacks from animals and poisonous creatures, forcing the tower to install multiple barriers and keep professors on duty. Rieland, meanwhile, noted that they still hadn't decided who would be on duty this week, to which Declein replied that he would take care of it. He also received the side quest, The Darkness of the Magic Tower, and felt like something was calling him, which is probably why the quest appeared. So Declein was looking forward to what would happen on this mountain, which at night turns the game into a real horror. 9 hours later, the boys from the Commoners Club gathered at a cafe near the Magic Tower to have a little snack, and this time, Ifrin treated everyone who wanted something, which seems strange, and many became curious about where she got the money. Julia told the boys that she had already submitted a plan for the creation of their club, so it should be approved soon, and this could be considered the first official meeting. They also discussed the practical training taking place on Dark Mountain, where as many as 50 people had signed up despite the many incidents there. And suddenly the boys felt a strange pressure, and a bright red light appeared around them, along with an incomprehensible sound. Ifrin, hearing someone calling for help, ran headlong into the forest near the Mountain of Darkness. As a result, as if under hypnosis, she found herself, without realizing it, in the very depths of the forest, although just a moment ago, she was at the cafe. Hearing the voice, she ran towards it, but ran into not a person, but a monster. Although she did not immediately realize it, suddenly everything around changed again, and the monster began to bleed. However, Ifrin was not afraid, and, deciding that someone was attacking them, decided to respond with a blow. But at that moment, Declein appeared in front of her, and she was even more surprised. Ifrin asked him if it was really he who attacked the girl, and how dare he attack a civilian. Declein told her to take a closer look, because this monster didn't look like a human at all. After some time, the girl's body changed dramatically, and a bloodthirsty monster appeared in front of them. Ifrin was most likely there due to an illusion created by the demon, and Declein told her to leave immediately. As a result, Declein was ready to fight the monster one-on-one. And since no one was around, it could be said that he could untie his hands. The demon, having lost his prey, went into a rage, but still could not reach Declan. Of course, the monster did not give up and continued to try to hit Declein, but it was all in vain. Declein, noticing the core on the demon's head, realized that it specialized in illusions. But thanks to Unwavering, which allows it to resist mental attacks, its illusions were meaningless. Meanwhile, the blood in Declein's veins continued to boil, the Declein bloodline filling him with endless rage, granting him special strength in the fight against demonic creatures. The Decleins were the heirs of an ancient line of demon hunters, and now this has manifested itself in Declein himself, because if he sees a demon, it will no longer live. This rage at the sight of the demon could not be compared to any other aggression. As a result, Declein easily defeated the demon and completed the side quest. The appearance of the demons marked the beginning of everything. It was a signal that the game without a player had begun. After everything that happened, Ifrin woke up in the hospital, which surprised her greatly, as she had forgotten what had happened. She was immediately told that a demon had appeared on the Mountain of Darkness the previous night, and that she had fallen under its spell, losing consciousness. A little later, she was taken to the hospital, and because of the demon, the passage to the mountain was blocked, and the Magic Tower began an investigation into the incident. However, the most unpleasant thing for Ifrin was that it was Professor Declein who saved her. Besides, 36 hours had passed since she had been admitted to the hospital, and it was Wednesday, which meant she was late for Declein's lecture. However, having run in a hurry, Ifrin still managed to arrive on time, and seeing that everything was okay with her, Julia and the other guys were very happy. After a while, Declein entered the classroom, and with him, Alan, whom the students had not previously met. Before the lecture began, Declein introduced Alan to the students, saying that he had now been appointed the new assistant professor, after which the students began to wonder whether Declein had really ever had an assistant with his character. The benefit of becoming an assistant professor was that the student became eligible to be assessed for a full professorship, and Declein would never have done that without a reason. Ifrin also had a similar opinion, because that was why her father remained an assistant at the age of 30, without becoming an assistant professor. The girl became curious as to why Declein had suddenly decided to promote this unknown boy. Meanwhile, it was time for the lecture, and this time it was practical. The students had to solve 3 problems in 3 hours. Ifrin, however, continued to think about what her father meant to Declein, and why he hadn't given him a chance, leaving him to rot. She asked herself this every time she looked at the bracelet her father had left behind, which served as a vessel for her material magic. She also didn't understand why he was suddenly so nice to her, and even though she needed to focus on the lecture, she couldn't remember a single spell because of these thoughts. After just 25 minutes and 15 seconds, Sylvia completed the task, in less than half an hour, while the others continued to think about spells. Sylvia was quite agitated and thought that Declein would find a reason to make her redo the task. But he said that the work was done perfectly and released her. After which, a satisfied Sylvia left the classroom, having first glanced at Ifrin, who had not even begun to complete the task yet. And in the end, absolutely everyone completed the task except Ifrin. She couldn't seem to focus, which made her think that this was the end for her. Besides failing to catch up with Sylvia, she was the only one who did not complete the task within the allotted time. This irritated Ifrin even more, and she didn't understand what was wrong with her. Whether she really was so stupid that she couldn't complete such a simple task? In the end, Ifrin decided to give in and put her plan for revenge on hold, believing that she was too weak even to study at university. But this was not the case. All this time, Declein continued to wait for her, and about 5 hours had already passed. This surprised Ifrin even more. Not understanding why Declan was still sitting there and waiting for her, he noted that she lost her composure over a simple task and ended up not completing it on time, to which Ifrin only apologized. Declein also said that even if someone is making fun of her, achieving better results, or even if her worst enemy is standing in front of her, she must maintain her composure. Besides, in this state, she would never be able to get close to Declan. In the end, he only said that he was disappointed in her, because he considered her an uncut diamond. Ifrin couldn't deny that Declein's words hadn't affected her in any way, and yet she didn't want to give up. She was overcome with intense anger and fury at her own weakness, and she wanted to complete the task at any cost to prove her worth. After all, she is not just a girl, but a capable magician who is able to protect herself and reveal her potential. Declein, in fact, did not go anywhere, but watched what was happening from the side. He spent a full 6 hours on her, and yet it was necessary to use her power in the coming events. After all, thanks to the recent appearance of the demon on the Mountain of Darkness, he realized that the main quest would begin very soon. And when the age of absolute evil arrives, characters capable of challenging it will appear in the main quest, and one of them will be the matured Ifrin. At the moment, she lacks moral fortitude and magical sense. But by overcoming these shortcomings, she will be able to achieve unprecedented growth. And of course, this could be dangerous for Declein himself, but he will not allow this. After all, fate is nothing more than an excuse for those who refuse to work hard, and Declein believes only in himself. After some time, Ifrin finally finished and left the classroom, heading to the dormitory. However, she never noticed Declan, because she was too angry with herself. As soon as Declan entered the classroom, he saw on the table a completed assignment that had taken Ifrin a whole 6 hours and 25 minutes to complete. Declein noted that Ifrin had accumulated all the worst habits of those who never graduated from the academy. But, nevertheless, the result of her work is worthy of competing for first place. Since Ifrin had already left, Declein also decided not to linger and went home. But on the way, an unexpected meeting awaited him. Suddenly, he met the one he least wanted to see right now. It was Zeit von Bruggen-Freuden, the current head of the Freuden family, and also Julia's older brother. It was he who pushed for the engagement of Declein and Julia. But more importantly, in terms of sheer strength, he surpasses even Ganesha, which is why he ranks third, and this character is known for his incredible combat prowess. Declein began to wonder why Zeit was looking for him, whether he really wanted to take away the snow firestone. If this is true, then the situation can be considered a variable death, because at the moment, Declein will not be able to oppose him in any way. Zeit noted that he was glad to see Declein, as he had begun to worry about rumors that things were not going very smoothly between him and Julia. He himself came to him to invite him to a dinner party. If, of course, Declein didn't mind. Declein replied that he had no objections, which Zeit was undoubtedly pleased about, saying that he had always appreciated his decisiveness and that the chosen restaurant would definitely be to his liking. Despite Zeit's outward friendliness, something about him frankly frightened Declein. Declein's instinct told him that he didn't even have a choice to refuse. After all, for Zeit, family is the highest priority, and it's scary to imagine how he will react if Declein becomes the reason for the disruption of his plans. The next day, Zeit also tried to invite Julia to a dinner party with Declein, but she was against it. She stated that they hated each other, and that she was busy training knights and simply did not have time to meet. Zeit asked if she was still upset with him because of the Snowfire Stone. No matter how hard he tried, Julia couldn't be convinced. But Zeit didn't give up, claiming that Declein most likely bought the medal to give her a sword. To which Julia replied that if Declein really gave her the sword, she would immediately announce the dissolution of the engagement. After these words, Zeit almost flared up and asked Julia to be more careful with her expressions. He explained to her that, as he had already said, breaking off an engagement was sheer stupidity, and feelings were not necessary in a marriage of convenience. Zeit added that, as far as he knew, no one loved her more than Declein. Or maybe she had someone else. But Julia replied that this was not the case. However, she did not reveal the real reason for her refusal. And as she left, Zeit told her that if they really had problems, they should discuss them at dinner. After the conversation, Julia tried to vent her anger with the blade. And it helped a little. Her subordinate, Veron, from the Order of Heidekind, approached her and said that her blade had become too rough. Julia apologized for letting him see it, to which Veron replied that Declein wasn't worthy of her, and it was strange that Zeit couldn't see it. Julia told him to stop, as it was not proper for a knight to talk about someone behind their back. She added that there was no need to get your hands dirty for her, because despite everything that was happening, she would be fine. Before leaving, she asked him to prepare everything necessary. For Verona, this incident became an answer. And now he knew how to prove his loyalty to Julia as a vassal. After all, now she is unhappy precisely because of Declein, and Veron is the one who will make her happy. That same night, at a council of elders in the Burke region, the topic of a demon's appearance on the Mountain of Darkness was raised. Since magic was created as a means of eradicating evil, and a demon was involved, they could not remain on the sidelines. Therefore, it was decided to send letters to 12 houses of magicians with an invitation to a meeting at the call of Burke. The next morning, Declein finally received the auction items: the Ring of Rufarina for restoring mana, and the ancient runic necklace for preserving it. Everything else, as Ganesha advised, he decided to place in storage. However, one problem still remained. The most important item refused to cooperate. Of course, Declein understood that he wouldn't be able to use the Snowfire Stone right away. But no matter how much he used telekinesis, the stone wouldn't move. The stone's mana seemed to resist its magic. In the game, the item was extremely expensive, and no one knew how to use it. And even if he starts working on it, it is unknown whether he will be able to move it with telekinesis later. But he found one text in the library. It spoke of the subjugation of the sword, a process called unification. Perhaps this means that Declein must form his own understanding of the sword. As a result, his guess was confirmed, but understanding 0.1% took a whole 2,000 mana points, and at this rate, it will take a whole year. Declein didn't like this arrangement and decided to prepare better. But today was Zeit's dinner party, and in 3 days, an event will take place that was planned even before Wujin took over Declein's body. The anniversary of his death. Zeit didn't lie as he promised. The dinner took place at the luxurious restaurant Von Michel. He also thanked Declein for his presence, saying that Julia had left earlier and was probably already inside. It was exactly like that. Julia was already sitting at the table waiting for the others. She was wearing an attractive dress, and it was difficult to recognize her without her armor. Declein also noticed this change, because before he had only seen her in knight's armor. Meanwhile, Josephine was also present at the dinner, and Declein did not expect to see her there. Although she tried to pretend that she had come simply to participate in the engagement discussions, Josephine was more than just Julia's sister. She is also one of the most dangerous characters for Declan, as she uses any means to achieve her goals. In other words, she is a real sociopath. She is also the leader of a secret intelligence organization called Shadow, and some believe that Josephine's strength can even rival that of Zeit. Julia, in turn, is the only person she cares about. So by hurting her, Declein risks incurring her wrath. Declein didn't understand why Josephine hadn't killed him yet, but upon entering here, He felt her bloodthirsty aura directed at him, seen through the villain's fate. The fact that he felt Josephine's desire to kill him meant that he was faced with an extremely dangerous death variable, and it could only be overcome by proving the sincerity of his feelings for Julia. Meanwhile, Zeit suggested that they discuss everything before serving food, and asked Declein when they would like to hold the wedding ceremony, since 3 years had passed since their engagement. Julia tried to object, but Zeit asked her not to interfere while they were talking. Declein needed to answer in a way that would satisfy several parties at once, because all this time he felt Josephine's gaze on him, as if she was ready to kill him. So he decided to take the responsibility off his shoulders by offering to leave the decision to Julia. And if she didn't believe in this marriage, he was willing to break off the engagement. Zeit was not happy with this turn of events and asked Declan if it was possible to just talk about breaking off the engagement. He also asked if this was connected to the fact that they had become somewhat distant lately, and perhaps it was worth thinking about how to improve their relationship. Julia's patience ran out, and she asked Zeit to leave her and Declan alone so she could talk in private. Neither Zeit nor Josephine objected, so they immediately left them. An angry Julia asked Declan what he had planned this time, and what he was trying to achieve. Even though they were alone, Declan knew that Josephine had probably installed a bug in the room. He also believed that Josephine could be eavesdropping on them right outside the door. However, this opened up an opportunity for him, since Josephine does not know that he is aware of her true nature. Declein truly loves Julia, and if he can convince her of this, perhaps he can avoid the inevitable death. He stated that he had told it all as it was. He too was powerless to break off the engagement, and they were both powerless in this. To this, Julia asked whether this was really why he had decided to torment her now, since even before they met, he had used his connections to arrange an engagement and promised the elders compensation. Then she asked if he remembered the words he had spoken to convince her then. He had said that fighting was dangerous, so he tried to force her to refuse to join the Imperial Order by offering her the captaincy of the Declein Order, which was controlled by the Declein family. And when she refused, he began spreading rumors. So Julia asked again what he was really trying to achieve. Declein understood perfectly well what she was talking about, because the old him had confused his obsession with keeping Julia with sympathy. He destroyed everything she held dear so that she had no choice but to stay with him. Declein had truly done unforgivable things. That was why Woojin, while in Declein's body, understood her fierce hatred. He tried to make amends by declaring that it would never happen again and that he accepted his guilt for all his attempts to shackle her. Declein noted that this did not only concern him. Her brother and sister had also gone too far, because if this were true, they would not have opposed the termination, since it was only a question of reputation. Moreover, Julia wants to leave her family to fulfill her dream of becoming a protector. But she was surprised how Declein found out about this. Declein said that he lacked honesty and loyalty, and was the complete opposite of what she was looking for. So he was not right for her. So he proposed to keep the engagement, but not get married. And although he wants her freedom with all his heart, he cannot allow it because of the circumstances. He also said that she could use his name for protection as long as she wanted, and he would support the engagement until her dream began to come true. Julia asked again what he was up to and why he was saying all this now. He replied that he didn't expect any reaction from her, but if he could dream of something, then let her smile at him at least once a month. That's all he wanted to ask of her, nothing more. Such a speech could not leave Julia indifferent. Moreover, she seemed to look at him differently. To avoid the inevitable death, Declein said exactly the words Julia wanted to hear, and her confusion looked very cute. Woojin himself couldn't help but admit that he had even adopted the feelings of love that he had felt for Julia Declein. Josephine was also pleased to hear such a speech from him, considering his feelings to be sincere, and decided to continue observing for now. Julia said that despite all these bright words, he wouldn't be bought so easily, but he managed to avoid a certain death. 3 days passed since then, and the anniversary of the death arrived. Because of this, Declein headed to the cemetery, a rather unique place, the atmosphere of which is capable of awakening strong emotions. The sunset light filtered through the weeds and cracks in the gravestones. Declein's heart came here before his body, and eventually merged with this place. His memories rest here. However, Woojin was not referring to Declein's memories, but to his own. Ara held a special place in his memory. One late night, Ara suggested adding an Easter egg to the game, and Woojin didn't quite get it at the time. Then she had an idea about a small detail that could be added to Declein, and since he was an intermediate boss, there was nothing strange about it. Woojin didn't approve of her idea, saying that it would only add extra work for them, And besides, she knew that they were already working night shifts. But Ara didn't back down, insisting that, in the end, they simply had to put their whole soul into this game. However, Woojin still didn't understand the point of it, but said that she had the right to do as she saw fit. Although Woojin considered this idea pointless and a waste of time, Ade, on the contrary, thought it was a good idea, since it hinted at the fact that Declan once had a fiancée. Now Woojin, in Declein's body, was trying to find these traces in order to regain his memories. So he came across a tombstone where Ara's name was engraved, but in the style of the game, and she was called Invu Ara von Fergus Mahinicht, and under the name was the inscription, "I will always be grateful to you." This left Woojin stunned. He didn't understand why Ara had engraved her name on this tombstone. After all, Declein was created in the image and likeness of Woojin. But why then did Ara use her own name as the name of Declein's deceased fiancé? And for what does she ultimately thank him? Just one simple phrase was able to evoke his emotions. For a second, he thought he heard Ada's whisper, and he was overwhelmed by memories of days gone by. The way she praised his illustrations with a shy smile, or how one night she gave him her coat when he was freezing. The way she held his hand and told him she loved him. The way she encouraged him when he felt weak. All those 7 years that Ara was by his side, all of this was their memories. It was truly Declein's moment of weakness. For the first time in all this time, he finally felt something. However, he was not the only one in the cemetery at that time. Lockheart was already secretly waiting for him. Just as Declein was about to head home, Lockheart came out to meet him. His murderous aura felt several meters away. Lockheart was surprised that Declein recognized him. Or rather, he was even more angry with him, because he considered it unfortunate that such a vain and arrogant mage would address him. Lockheart himself was a villain and mini-boss only available to mages, and the reason he became a natural enemy for all mages was because of his magic nullification ability. As in many other games, the magic nullification attribute can be equated to a cheat. But that's not all. Lockhart's attribute has no noticeable limitations. It doesn't even require direct contact. Magic simply doesn't work within the radius of his ability. This is why Lockheart can be considered the most unpleasant and inconvenient opponent for any mage. Because of his special ability, most mages would tremble before him, but not Declein. This was because, at the moment, Declein didn't care what abilities Lockheart had. Defeating him was no problem. The thing is, just a few days ago, Declein managed to collect 10 coins, and with their help, he purchased Mana Quality Improvement. Thanks to this, he was able to increase the efficiency of his mana manipulation. With the new skill acquired, he was able to unleash much more power, using the same amount of mana as before. It seems that this improvement had an even greater effect on him than expected. After all, the moment he went about his daily routine, he suddenly realized something strange. He really had become stronger. It felt like he had improved not only his mana, but himself as a whole. And that was what allowed him to defeat Lockheart. In this way, he also managed to overcome the variable death and earn some more store currency. Mana quality improvement also affected his attributes. With Iron Man, he could have defeated Lockheart anyway, but with the attribute boost, it became much easier. However, Lockheart still had strength left, and he continued to speak unflatteringly about all mages, calling them apostates, who were unable to survive without their magic. The fact that he had a unique ability comparable to a cheat and felt such anger towards mages, as well as calling them apostates, gave Declein some ideas. And to test his suspicions, Declein asked Lockheart if he was really a Scarlet-born. Lockheart was extremely surprised and immediately asked how Declan knew about this. The Purple-born got their name because they are born wrapped in a blood-red shell. And there are rumors that their lineage goes back to ancient demons. They live on this continent, hiding their essence, and are the direct opposite of magicians. And since magic was created as a counter to demons, the conflict between mages and the Crimsonborn became a central part of the creation of this world. And also one of the key storylines of the game itself. Because of their origins, the Crimsonborn were constantly in danger, and Declein was sure that a purge was currently taking place somewhere. So he told Lockheart that he understood him. He must have experienced the era of oppression firsthand, and he really felt sorry for him. Declein also added that he understands all of this because he knows that the Scarlet-born are not guilty of anything. However, his words only angered Lockheart even more, as he was not going to tolerate such treatment. Declein introduced himself, saying that he was from the Declein family, an ancient noble family that had not yet lost its dignity. He also admitted to Lockhart that he had only lost his composure once, when confronted by a demon. After all, due to the legacy of the Declans, who have hunted demons since ancient times, his blood literally boils at the sight of them. So Declein asked Lockhart if he had lost control in his presence, given in to provocation, or gone berserk. And since nothing like that happened, it meant that Lockhart was not a demon at all, but a human. At that moment, law enforcement arrived at the scene of their collision to arrest Lockhart. Declein had previously told Lockhart that he could trust him, so it would be better to remain calm and let himself be arrested. Inspector Ropa arrived and was quite surprised by Declein's stunning blow, which easily knocked out Lockhart. Meanwhile, Declein used magic to recreate a kind of handcuffs. It looked so mesmerizing that the inspector couldn't take his eyes off it. Declein gave him the steel wire because Lockhart can neutralize magic, meaning the magical handcuffs are powerless against him. He also asked the inspector how he managed to come here so quickly, and whether they were really somewhere nearby. However, the inspector didn't quite understand what he was talking about, because they had come here in response to a message that they thought had been sent by Declein, but in fact, it had been sent by someone else. However, Declein did not pursue the situation any further and decided to leave, and was also glad that he had managed to resolve everything without resorting to bloodshed. After all, no matter what, and no matter how terrible Lockhart was, Declein didn't want to hurt anyone in a place where traces of Ara's presence still remained. The next day, Uriel came to Declein to announce the convening of a meeting in Burke for the first time in 15 years. At this time, Declein was in his training room, and Uriel came there to personally deliver the letter to him. It stated that a demon had appeared during the recent incident on Dark Mountain, and as a result, Burke wanted to call all the mages together to discuss it. Meanwhile, Declein also received the quest, Convocation of the Berchts, and the meeting itself will take place in a week. You can take 2 companions with you, including 1 bodyguard. Uriel pointed out that if Declein needed a bodyguard, he could take Jeff, since he used to be a mercenary. But Declein replied that there was no need for that. Besides, Declein wasn't thrilled with Jeff, who now preferred to sit behind the wheel, rather than practice using weapons. However, Uriel was worried about Declein, because if he went there without a bodyguard, he could easily die. Declein, meanwhile, was surprised that Uriel was worried about him, even though she denied it in every possible way. However, be that as it may, Uriel took upon herself the matter of a bodyguard for Declein. At this time, at the Frightened Order base, young knights were also training hard under the guidance of Julia. Meanwhile, the vice captain of the order was offered one task, and a rather serious one at that, and something was bothering him, so he was still thinking about whether to take the task or not. Besides, this task was related to protecting Declein, so he didn't know how to discuss this task with Julia. And to be more precise, the entire train would need to be guarded, and the Declans probably knew that if it had only been Declein, they would certainly not have taken him on. So they decided to dilute it. Veron advised the vice captain to take on this task, saying that not everyone is suitable for guarding an entire train, and if they can complete this task, the fame of their order will increase dramatically. The vice captain noted that there were some differences between Declein and Julia, to which Veron replied that Julia was not the type to let personal feelings interfere with the mission. As a result, Veron was able to convince the vice captain to take on this task, and he immediately went to notify Julia about it. In fact, Veron tried to convince the vice captain to take on this task not just for the sake of it, but for his own reasons. The meeting itself was to take place in Burke, the name of the mountains in the northern part of the continent, 3.5 kilometers high, and also the home of the magicians called Elders. Burke is the place where all the ideas of all the schools of magic from all over the continent are gathered. And not only the magic tower, but also the flying island of magicians is subject to the decisions made there. His influence is so great that this place can be called a pillar of the magical world. And since the assembly is convened very rarely, once every few decades, being summoned to Burke is both an honor and a recognition of the magician's fame. But at the same time, the summoning from Burke is also called the Graveyard of Magicians. The journey to Burke was long, so the mages traveled there by train, boarding the platform for the train departing specifically for Burke. And this time, the Frightened Order, and Julia in particular, will be responsible for protecting Declein. Alan was also with Declein, surprised by how cold it was outside, despite it being April. Julia greeted Declein, saying that from this transfer station onwards, Her order would take responsibility for guarding the first half of the train. She also noted that they would make every effort to ensure safety. And meanwhile, she was very worried, looking at Declein. At that moment, she remembered Declein's words that he had spoken at the last dinner, which made her even more embarrassed, and she didn't know whether she should smile at him or not. The vice captain, observing Julia's behavior, was no less surprised, noting that despite her sincere hatred for Declein, she was ready to try her best for him. He was about to take on the responsibility of protecting Declein, but then Veron intervened and declared that this time he would take care of the professor's protection. Even though the vice captain called the young man a skilled warrior, Declein was distrustful of him, so he used the skill Sharp Vision on him, but did not feel any special energy. After that, Julia and the vice captain left them, leaving Veron with Declein and Alan. Meanwhile, Julia also tried to smile at Declein, as he had asked her to at dinner, but it came out rather peculiar. Despite all this strangeness, Declein was pleasantly surprised that Julia kept her promise. Several hours had already passed since the train set off. At this time, Declein was thinking about why the summoning from Burke was called the Graveyard of Magicians for a reason. There's a reason Burke is called the Pillar of the Magical World, despite his rather controversial second persona. It's all because of an unexpected event that occurs every time Burke convenes an assembly: an attack on a train. Successfully overcoming this, one of Declan's many possible deaths, requires a game of wits, or more precisely, choosing the safest train from all those heading to Burke. If you want to take the safe option, you can use dark connections and find out information about which train will be attacked. And if the real Declan were in Woojin's place, he would have done the same. But in his case, this cannot be done, because he cut off such ties after becoming Declan. That is why he made several preparations to protect himself. For example, it was for this reason that he obtained the martial arts technique of the legendary warrior Ifrin and realized it with understanding. Declein was also surprised at how peacefully Alan slept, because just a couple of days ago, when he invited him to go with him, he cried and sniffled with delight. Meanwhile, only one station remained: Burke. And so far, nothing terrible has happened. Declein was rather relieved that all his preparations might be in vain, because before leaving, he had used Midas Touch on the items from the famous master Georg to increase their defensive properties. Meanwhile, he also reinforced the wood-steel products that he distributed throughout the train. He even improved Alan's attire, making it more durable, just in case. As a result, he used Midas Touch so often that he had almost no mana left, which made him very sad. However, it can't be called a waste of mana either, because no matter what, preparation is never a bad thing. At that moment, Declein was finally able to exhale, hoping that the rest of the journey would be just as peaceful and calm. However, his hopes were not justified, and at the moment when he least expected the attack, it happened. Meanwhile, not only Declein was invited to Burke, a few days before his departure, other magicians also went there. Declein and Sylvia also went there, and during the trip, the father asked his daughter how she was doing with the tasks in the magic tower. Sylvia told her father that there were quite a lot of them, and she still missed a couple of lectures. But Declein was surprised that even though his daughter would become an archmage, she still worked harder than anyone else. To which Sylvia replied that what kind of archmage would she be if she wasn't capable of even such a trifle? And to be honest, she wasn't worried about Ifrin. She just wanted to attend as many of Declein's lectures as possible. Meanwhile, Sylvia asked her father why they had set out for the meeting in Burke so early, when they could easily have left a few days later. Declein asked her if she knew why the road to Burke was also called the Mage's Graveyard. But Sylvia thought it was just another horror story. However, Declein noted that this was not the case, because every time a meeting was called in Burke, several mages lost their lives. 15 years ago, 11 mages died. Since ancient times, participation in this meeting was considered a sign that your family had the necessary prestige, and if they were chosen from 20 families, one could consider that their name was forever inscribed in history. However, the chosen families who failed to make it to the meeting were permanently excluded from this list, and according to another rule, their place was taken by a new family. Therefore, the easiest way to get rid of one of these prestigious families is a journey to Burke, like walking on thin ice, where those who want to become new members of the congregation prey on the lives of its current members. Giltheon told all this to Sylvia in order to explain the reason for their haste, as he had received information that a certain group of people were planning to attack the next train. But since Sylvia was not familiar with all the cruelty of the world, she was worried about what might happen if they were discovered. So Giltheon decided to tell Sylvia that not everyone in this world smiles at each other, asking her why she thought all 12 traditional families always took their places. And if someone has to be punished for such actions, then everyone will be hit. But deaths that happen on the way to this meeting are considered deaths that occurred due to natural causes. A similar alleged accident occurred on the train that Declein was on. The boys managed to survive only because Declein had developed his telekinesis sufficiently, and also thanks to Estrin's martial arts. Meanwhile, the killers had already gathered on the roof of the train to finish what they had started, and were already preparing an attack on Declein, since they had been promised a huge reward for his murder. In an instant, they made their way into the carriage where Declein was, but it was a trap. To their great regret, Declein had been expecting their visit and had set traps in advance. Meanwhile, in order to prevent Alan from worrying unnecessarily and causing problems, Declein decided that it would be a good idea to knock him out. However, he didn't have time, so he asked Veron to carry Alan to a safe place, and also to help with the evacuation of the remaining survivors from the other cars. Declein was also slightly surprised that Alan's neck was surprisingly smooth and soft, something he could only feel thanks to Iron Man. And he began to wonder if Alan was a girl and not a guy. However, he didn't have time to think about this now, because at the moment, the problem with the attack on the train remained urgent. As a result, Declein was left alone with the killers, and before killing them, he said that today they would die of natural causes. Even though Declein had improved his skills and stats quite a bit, the battle turned out to be a little more grueling than he had expected. Besides, after reducing the damage from the explosion and fighting the assassins, his mana was almost depleted. At that moment, Veron also came to him and said that all the remaining passengers were safe. Meanwhile, Declein couldn't help but notice how Veron's gaze had changed since their first meeting. However, he decided to put all unnecessary thoughts aside, thinking that he had changed so much because of the sudden ambush. But be that as it may, Declein's fears were not in vain, because Veron really did not come to him for no reason. Suddenly, the villain's fate activated, and Veron declared that in the end, Declein was destined to die by his sword. Declein tried to remain calm and asked Veron if he was acting this way because someone ordered him to do so. He thought that Julia had asked him to do this, but after these words, Veron became even more angry. Veron declared that he would not forgive Declein for uttering his mistress's name, because she was a true knight who would never have intended such a thing. That's why today Declein will die at his hands. But Veron is doing this not for himself, but for Julia. Declein realized that he was in a very difficult situation, because now he only had 10 units of mana, and it was unlikely that he would be able to defeat someone who was considered a skilled warrior, even in the Order of Freydin. Meanwhile, Veron did not delay in killing Declein and suddenly attacked him. Declein, realizing the situation he was in, decided that he had no other way to save himself except to cancel telekinesis. After this, the train began to fall rapidly downwards. Meanwhile, Sylvia was already in Burke and waiting for the rest of the magicians. She was also accompanied by a night guard of the Iliade family named Sirio, who informed Sylvia that everyone had arrived in Burke except Declein and Ihelm, after which Sirio left, telling Sylvia to call him if she needed anything. However, Sylvia herself was more worried about Declan after all those stories her father had told her. After all, on the day when Declein came to the cemetery, Sylvia was also there. But then, she did not plan to spy on him. She herself came to the grave of her mother, Cielia von Elemen Ilade, who was a proud mage, the wife of Giltheon, and also the beautiful mother of Sylvia. That day, Sylvia had just visited her mother to talk to her, and it was an ordinary day, no different from any other. Then she told her how terrible Professor Declein was because he gave them too many assignments, as if he thought they only learned from him. At that very moment, she heard strange sounds that she could not ignore. Looking closer, she saw Declein, who was mourning the grave at that moment, and even seeing his hunched back, she could sense his noble presence. At first glance, one could unmistakably recognize Declein. Sylvia also wondered what he was doing in such a place, because she didn't think that such a person was capable of mourning the dead. However, when she saw the tears on his face, she was shocked to the depths of her soul. After all, Declein is the one who always remains cold and stern, no matter what happens. And yet, even such a seemingly cold monster can shed tears. Sylvia found this incredible, as she had always thought of Declein as an annoying professor who acted so high and mighty. But even he had memories of a lost love. Those tears she saw then, like falling stars, continued to invade her mind. Remembering her father's words about a certain group planning to attack the trains that would depart later, she was beside herself. That's why she wanted to try using the Mana Stone as a conductor, which Declein had once talked about in a lecture. From the 3 attributes of origin magic, it is created using the caster as the source, and Sylvia's magic, composed of the 3 original elements, began to take shape through the Mana Stone. As a result, Sylvia was able to create the original colors of creation. She named her creation Shoestrick, and sent him flying so that he could show her what he saw. Meanwhile, Declan tried to find a way to avoid death. Meanwhile, he was extremely lucky. The train caught on a rock, and as a result, did not crash to the ground. However, he ended up with several broken bones, although he was able to quickly recover thanks to Iron Man. However, the troubles did not end there. Veron also survived and attacked Declein again. Declein was amazed that even after this, Veron remained healthy. But be that as it may, the fight continued, and Veron was determined to kill him right now. In truth, Declein had little chance, because Veron was much stronger, and even in perfect condition, he could hardly defeat him. However, it's worth remembering that Declan has a skill called Determination, which activates during combat and maintains mental strength until the end of the fight. Therefore, even having found himself in such a terrible situation, Declein continued to believe in victory. But even so, it didn't help him much, and he found himself on the brink of death. One successful strike of the sword, and the game would be over. And Woojin began to wonder if he would wake up in his office as if nothing had happened. But at the same time, he didn't know what would happen if this didn't happen. Just when he thought he was finished, the space suddenly began to shake. Something strange happened. In an instant, someone cut off Verona's hand that was holding the sword. Declein didn't understand what had happened, but he realized that this was his chance. Using shurikens, he managed to turn the tide of the battle, and now Veron was on the brink of death. And now, it was no longer Veron who was looking down at him, but rather Declein who was looking at him. Neither Veron nor Declein understood what had happened, but Declein still asked why he wanted to kill him. Veron replied that it was simple. He remembered all the atrocities he had committed against Julia. Declein asked if he really attacked him for Julia's sake, even though she hadn't even asked for it. He also wondered who she was to him if he was willing to do such a thing. Veron replied that he would never understand it. Their meeting with Julia was accidental. She arrived at the house of a noble family, and Veron was just trying to enter the territory. Julia was surprised that, despite his size, Veron was able to climb over such a high fence. Then she saw hidden potential in him, and under the pretext of taking him to the police herself, took him with her. Veron was of the Frisian family, known for its behavior, so Julia believed everything he told her. However, she condemned him for hitting the family heir. But despite this, she invited Veron to go with her, promising to teach him self-control. After that meeting, Veron became part of the knightly order, which he was certainly happy about. However, due to his character in childhood, he could not find a common language with others, which is why he sometimes felt like an outcast. And the only one who took care of him all this time was Julia. He never told her what was really going on, insisting that he was fine, or so he thought. Because as long as he was with Julia, he didn't feel lonely, because she was always there. Julia was special in Verona's eyes. She always helped others and did not put up with injustice. His respect and admiration grew, and with it, his secret love. Veron admitted to Declein that he understood that his feelings could harm Julia and become a burden for her. But despite this, he wants to kill Declein, thinking that if he doesn't do it, he will one day ruin her life. Veron was telling the truth, because everything bad that happened in the game was just a butterfly effect from Declan's actions. However, this time, everything will be different, because Woojin in Declein's body will change what he did and prevent the story from ending in destruction. So, instead of killing Veron, Declein extended his hand to him, declaring that he would not harm Julia. But even then, Veron did not change his mind and still wanted to kill Declein. In this case, Declein was forced to kill Veron, saying that his stupid choice would torment Julia for the rest of her life. At that moment, Julia was overcome by a strange feeling, as if something had happened to someone close to her. Thus, Veron died, a victim of his own decision, which he believed was made for Julia's sake. Shoestrick watched what was happening from the sky, and Sylvia saw it through his eyes. She saw how Declan killed the guard, he fell off the cliff, but it was the knight who tried to attack first. At that moment, Sirio approached Sylvia and asked her to come back because the meeting was starting soon. Sylvia went with him, but she was still worried about whether Declan would make it in time. Lilia Fremian, deputy head of the investigation bureau, arrived at the scene. She was told there had been an explosion followed by an attack, but fortunately no one had been hurt. She was shocked to learn that 2 people were missing, Knight Veron and Professor Declein. One of the officers pointed to Alan, saying she could get details from him, but Alan was still unconscious, and police assumed it was due to shock from the attack. Lilia questioned other passengers, and they told her about a strange phenomenon. The train hung in the air and then fell. One man even managed to take a photo, although he himself did not know how he did it. Lily was amazed. Could Declein really lift a train into the air with the help of magic? Suddenly she received a telepathic message. The knight Veron was dead. He tried to kill Declein, but the professor survived. It was at that moment that a silhouette of a man resembling Declan approached them. Although he looked battered, his gaze retained its usual coldness. And if it weren't for a strange phenomenon, Declein would have died at the hands of Veron, whose name wasn't even recorded in the game. Therefore, if it were not for the help of an unknown person, he would have found himself at the bottom of the cliff. And it was difficult to comprehend. Meanwhile, Lily wanted to ask him a few questions regarding the incident, but Declein only asked her what time it was, and Lilia replied that it was 3:30. This meant that he had only 6 hours left to reach Burke. Lilia tried to ask him a question, but Declan interrupted her with his own. He asked if there was a way to Burke, and she, beginning to get irritated, replied that there was a road and a sea route. Then Lily wanted to interrogate him again, but suddenly noticed that he had disappeared. She was amazed that after all the mana losses, he was still able to escape, and she realized that this was the same Declan that Lockhart had told her about. Meanwhile, the clock read 9:53 and the meeting was about to start, but Declein was still not there. Before the beginning, the elder wanted to express his gratitude to everyone who responded to the call. He then released a powerful wave of mana, overwhelming everyone in the hall. Sylvia realized that it was most likely Declan, the elder of Burke, a living legend who had renounced secular life. This meant that Sylvia had to at least reach his level to qualify for the title of Archmage. Before the meeting began, Declein clarified the list of those who had arrived, among whom was Giltheon. Also present was Itensil of the Brand family. Bedin from the Viorod family could not miss the event either. Ihelm of Rewind was also present. However, when Declein's name was called, he was not there. Declein stated that if he did not appear by the 3rd call, he would be excluded from the 12. This caused a wave of discussion, as the Euclins were among the first 12 mages. But some considered this to be natural, considering Declein unworthy of his ancestors. Sylvia was shocked at how Declein lived if no one even worried about him. However, she herself hoped that he would still come. Declein said his name twice, but just as he was about to say it a 3rd time, the door opened. And at that moment, Declan entered, miraculously making it to the meeting. Despite everything that had happened, he confidently stated that the head of the Uklianov had arrived. The meeting began calmly, and the first topic was the appearance of the demon of the Mountain of Darkness, but it was quickly closed. Itensil noted that this was more important than the demon in the capital, and suggested sending mages and interacting with the church. Her opinion was accepted, and since no one objected, the matter was closed. After this, a short break was announced to prepare for the next discussion. For Declein, it was quite tiring, since he ran here like crazy so as not to be late for the meeting. And now he has neither mana nor strength. But even so, his appearance was still perfect. Even in this state, Declein's features were indeed quite irritating. As soon as Declein left the meeting hall, he was immediately met by Alan, who had been worried about him all this time. After what happened on the train, Declein no longer thought of Alan as an innocent child, but began to suspect something. Meanwhile, he asked Alan to stay close to him all this time to keep an eye on her, recalling the quote, "Keep your friends close and your enemies closer." The next topic at the meeting was to decide what the mages would do with the newly arrived wizard from the Crimson-born race. This was a rather sensitive topic, which is unlikely to end as quickly as the previous one. Bedin stated that the Purple-born race was like parasites, secretly reproducing, laying offspring within their society, infecting the lands. Itensil did not remain silent this time either, asking Bedin what evidence he had to support his words, since they had no way of distinguishing the race of the Crimson-born from others. Bedin noted that they could come up with such a feature, since there must be a way to identify them, given the characteristics of their race. Although he didn't know why, he was sure that the Scarlet-Born were recognizing each other and gathering together. And he was also sure that they had a leader. However, Etensel indignantly stated that all this was just rumors, but he was sure that it was all true. Bedin declared that it was because of Etensel's indecision that countless mages had died 60 years ago, after which silence reigned in the hall. And Giltheon, deciding to dilute this silence, asked Declein what he thought about this, because his Declein is a great family of exorcists who have been standing at the tip of the spear for many years, destroying demons. As a man of the present, Wujin understood such situations. The hatred that arose from refusing to think about such topics always led to unnecessary misfortunes. However, persecuting the Crimson-Born was wrong. Even if he couldn't stop them, Declein wanted to delay them as long as possible for the sake of the future main task. Because the common enemy of this world is not the race of the Scarlet-Born. Declein stated that in ancient times, this race was indeed an enemy of his family. However, if one carefully examines the documents, it turns out that a simple misunderstanding was to blame for everything. 237 years ago, during the Witcher Rodrin incident, Rodrin was accused despite his innocence. But because of this incident, pogroms began, and many of the Purple-Born were killed, and they took revenge, and thus this cycle of bloodshed began. And that incident Ben mentioned earlier, which happened 60 years ago, was just politics. Just a mine with mana stones was discovered on their land. Bedin was not pleased with such statements, and he stated that it was not just politics, since it was the Euclins who took the mine back then, and besides, he was completely sure that the bloodline of the Crimson-Born was mixed with demonic energy. Declein noted that their family's tradition was indeed to kill demons, but not the Crimson-Born race. But Bedin did not change his mind. In response, Declein asked Bedin whether he was ready to take responsibility for such words. After all, one should not so unceremoniously declare people to be demons, because the one who says such a thing can become that very demon himself. After this, the meeting reached an impasse and the topic was postponed until the next day. Meanwhile, according to Burke's rules, there can only be one invitee in one room. So Giltheon and Sylvia are forced to be in different rooms. Even though Sylvia was no longer a little child, Giltheon still worried about her. However, things were not without incident. And that night, when Sylvia woke up to drink some water, something strange happened. Suddenly, the space began to vibrate, and everything around changed its appearance. As a result, Sylvia's room was replaced by a long corridor. Sylvia didn't understand what had happened, whether she had done something wrong, and then decided to reread Burke's rules again. The rules stated that it was advisable not to wake up until the morning. Otherwise, there was a risk of ending up in a different place. However, in the second vestibule, where Sylvia stayed a couple of days ago, there were no such magical phenomena. She began to wonder if everything had changed because she was next to Burke's meeting room. Sylvia was angry with herself for allowing herself to relax, thinking that everything was fine as long as she didn't leave the confines of her room. However, she tried to remain calm, but this lasted until the moment she heard a strange sound. After this, Sylvia began to run wherever her eyes led her. The rules state that the Rosary Hotel building has only one floor, so any stairs that appear should be avoided. Moreover, if while walking down the corridor she comes across a slightly open door, she should under no circumstances enter it, or even look inside. Sylvia, however, ignored all these warnings out of fear. And the rules also stated that if someone started knocking on the door, it was best not to answer or make any unnecessary noise. However, Sylvia was so scared that she ignored all this and tried to find a way out of this horror. Suddenly, the door she had been knocking on so furiously opened. And what was even more surprising to Sylvia was that Declein came out of that door and asked her what she was doing there. Without waiting for an explanation from her, Declein invited her inside, after which Sylvia told him what had happened. And Declein replied that she should have studied the rules more thoroughly because Burke is an amazing place, even for magicians. Looking at Declein's unchanging appearance and unwavering gaze, Sylvia wondered if he was able to open the door just because he was Declein. Suddenly, something quickly tried to attack her, and Sylvia, being terrified, did not know what to do. However, Declein told her not to move, and at that moment, the magical phenomenon called the Wandering Ghost was dispelled by his magic. Declein also noted that there was nothing surprising about this, since magic was not created for killing. After these words, Sylvia decided to show Declein her skills by conjuring a flowing flame and other spells that she learned about in his lectures. Declein guessed them without even looking, so Sylvia decided to do something half-heartedly. Declein noted that it was indeed not bad. However, there was a slight instability in this magic circle, which was due to the air she had injected into the flame. Sylvia became interested in finding out what exactly was causing this instability. However, Declein said that Sylvia should figure this out on her own, without his help. Sylvia was dissatisfied, saying that he had helped Ifrin, but Declein replied that this was not the case, and Ifrin had managed on her own. Meanwhile, he also told her to curb her impatience, and since time was on her side, if she continued to work at the same pace, she would certainly become stronger. There is no need to rush here. You need to do everything step by step. This is the only way to achieve the desired result. Because there are only 3 people in this world who have this level of talent. All her life, Sylvia had heard similar phrases, that she was a true talent destined to become an archmage. However, she considered those words to be hypocrisy and callous flattery, while Declein's words sounded completely different to her. As a result, Sylvia stayed to sleep in Declein's room so as not to get into any more trouble. Meanwhile, Declein felt a strange aura, similar to the effect of Midas. After that, he decided to follow the trail of this very aura in order to find the cause. Since this mountain path was very difficult to access, and the case of Burke's collection was an exceptional opportunity, Declein decided that it was likely that a very rare item would be found nearby. Suddenly, a monster appeared next to him, trying to scare him. However, no matter what the monster did, no matter how much it screamed, Declein simply ignored it, as if he hadn't seen it at all. Meanwhile, Declein asked the monster if he had seen any object here that stored a large amount of mana. After this, the monster became upset and, bursting into tears, ran away from Declan as far as possible. However, after going a little further, Declein finally found the reason for Midas's actions. He managed to stumble upon a refined mana tree fragment, a fragment of a magical tree that was split by a lightning strike. The tree itself is rich in mana, but after the lightning strike, part of it was purified and became an excellent material for crafting. This discovery exceeded all his expectations, because after arriving in this world, he tirelessly trained and conducted various studies. And because of his ordinary talent, Declein felt somewhat limited. But if he could craft a staff from this wood, it could help him reach the required level of strength a little faster. As a result, the final catch after such a sudden outing pleased Declan very much. The next day, the meeting continued in a much more tense atmosphere. Veron tried his best to prove that the Crimsonborn were demons, while Declein completely denied his words and arguments. The heated argument between Declein and Veron stunned all the other mages at the meeting, and also made them wonder why Declein was protecting the Crimsonborn. Therefore, the mages, who also did not share Veron's opinion, became interested in what Declein was actually planning. Sylvia was more than sure that Gilthian was not the only one who believed that Declein was protecting the Crimsonborn for some selfish motive. However, they were all wrong, because now Declein is the only one who is telling the truth. Eventually, Declein got fed up with this argument and ordered Declein and Veron to stop this pointless discussion. Declein realized that it seemed they would not be able to reach a common opinion on this topic, so he suggested returning to the Crimsonborn a little later, and for now moving on to the next discussion. There were no problems with the remaining topics, and with that, the protracted meeting came to an end. Declein tried to do everything in his power for the sake of the future main quest, but in doing so, he incurred the disfavor of some members of the assembly. The next day, Declein went to the shopping district of Bercht, since the opportunity arose. There he wanted to find the necessary materials to craft a staff before leaving Bert. Meanwhile, Alan suddenly shouted, saying that her savior was right there, because she was only able to get here safe and sound thanks to her help. And this girl was Lilia, from whom Declein successfully escaped last time. After which, Declein and Alan decided to invite Lilia to dinner to thank her for her help on the way. Lilia also thanked them for this, and, after apologizing, asked Declan what happened to Veron, to which he calmly replied that he died during the attack. Lily was confused and didn't understand how exactly Declan was different from the others, since Lockhart spoke about him like that. The fact is that Lilia was also a Crimsonborn, and when Lockhart was brought to the territory of the Empire, to the Imperium Investigation Bureau, from where he was to be sent to Recordoc, the strictest prison, she spoke with him tete-a-tete. Lockhart deserved this punishment, as he had killed many mages and did not object to the decision. After some time, Lilia ordered him to activate his ability so that they could talk privately. After this, using his skill, Lockhart disabled the wiretap in Lilia's office. After that, Lily seemed to have been replaced. Her calm and cold gaze was replaced by furious anger, and she demanded an explanation from Lockhart. Why he again decided to disgrace their family. Lilia was already ready to kill him, because if anyone found out that Lockhart and Lilia were connected, they would both start having problems. Lockhart asked her if she thought they could have a peaceful life in the Empire, and Lilia replied that it was only if no one knew who they really were. Lilia noted that they were no different from ordinary people except for their birth, but Lockhart thought otherwise, stating that they were born with a devilish gift, and this is what people fear. However, Lilia told him to shut up, as the Crimson-born weren't the only ones who received a gift at birth, and in the meantime asked him why he had attacked Declan in the first place if they were already keeping an eye on the Declans. Lilia noted that they weren't planning to kill him yet, they were just watching, but if Declan continued to act like this, they would have no choice but to take him out. But Lockhart, on the contrary, told her not to kill or touch Declan, since he was a true aristocrat, and they had no need to kill him. Lily called Lockhart a fool, because, of course, Declein is not a true aristocrat, since he committed a lot of crimes. Lockhart, after seeing the elegance with which Declein spoke about the Crimson-born being people and not demons, and his look full of confidence, was sure of the truth of his words. Perhaps if there were more aristocrats like Declan, they would live side by side with the people. So he told Lilia that Declan did not kill him, despite his origin. To this, Lilia asked him if he knew that Declan's ancestors led the ideas of genocide and oppression of the Purple-born. Lockhart replied that he didn't know, but if they treated him the same way as his ancestors, just because he had their blood, then it would only justify the theories that they were demons. And this infuriated Lilia a little, because it was true. He also asked her how long she thought she would be able to hide her origins, given her position. And Lilia was sure that no one would know who she really was, since they were indistinguishable from ordinary people, even through a blood test. Of course, there are foods that they should not eat, but simply avoiding them is enough. Lilia noted that, be that as it may, the emperor was not in the best condition, and a new ruler would soon ascend the throne. And they needed to monitor what each of the contenders thought of the Scarlet-born. She also warned him that until then, their people would not act, and that Lockhart needed to shut up and stay in Recordac. Now, sitting right in front of Declein, Lilia wondered what exactly made him different from the others, and what made him a true aristocrat. Meanwhile, Lilia smelled the smell of alcohol, which made her feel a little disgusted. And the source of this smell was Ihelm, who had come to talk to Declein. Even though Declein thought they had nothing to talk about, Ihelm declared that he had come to hear something from the depths of his dark and dirty heart. At the same time, the Order of the Knights of Frieden received the sad news of Veron's death. Upon learning of this, Julia was shocked and ordered the vice-captain to make all necessary preparations. She wants to hear Declan's explanation of what happened in person as soon as he returns. Lily, meanwhile, was quite surprised to see Ihelm and did not quite understand what was happening. Ihelm asked Declan what all that talk at the meeting was for, since he had really managed to catch him off guard. Moreover, Ihelm was interested to know from him why he suddenly decided to side with the Scarlet-born. Ihelm reminded Declein that he himself had recently proposed destroying them, and long before that, he had insisted that lower species had no right to life. Moreover, the document in which he condemns the Purple-born is still at the university. Ihelm asked him if he had really found himself a Purple-born slave to do his research in his place. Alan also intervened in their conversation, telling Ihelm to stop insulting the professor. However, Declein asked him not to interfere, adding that Ihelm's brain was like rotten cheese, so his train of thought was not surprising. Ihelm also didn't forget to remind everyone that there were only 6 months left before the research presentation, or maybe even 3, and then everyone would find out what he was really capable of. After this, Ihelm left, and Lilia wondered whether Declein had really sided with the Crimson-born, since he had behaved in such a way, despite the risk of offending the other participants of the meeting. The next day, before leaving Burt, Declein met with one of the greatest craftsmen and ordered a staff from him. Apparently, old Declan had visited this craftsman before, and thanks to him, Woojin was able to complete the quest unknown to him. On the way back, Declein and Alan were placed in the same carriage with Bedden. Bedden didn't even try to hide his hostility, but fortunately, it didn't escalate. As a result, this long journey was coming to an end, and there was one last transfer ahead. However, not everything was so simple, and at one of the stations, Declein met Julia, and he already guessed why she was there. However, despite all the bad thoughts, Julia only asked him how Veron had shown himself. At first, Declein wanted to tell her the whole truth, that Veron had tried to kill him, which is why he had to fight back, because he wanted to be honest with her. However, now, standing in front of her and looking into her eyes, he simply could not do it. For this truth was extremely cruel, and Julia's convictions were unshakable. But not her heart. Such was her true nature. And if she had found out the truth, she would certainly have started to blame herself and would have considered that her subordinate's misconduct was her personal responsibility. So, for her own good, Declein decided to hide the truth, even if it meant incurring someone's hatred. In the end, he told Julia that it was difficult to assess what Veron was like, but he was extremely emotional. Julia thanked him and then wished Declan good luck, saying that they were just on their way to Veron's. Alan was slightly indignant, stating that the knights had no logic at all, since they too were victims of that incident, and yet they looked at them as enemies. Meanwhile, Sylvia approached them and asked Declein why he hadn't told Julia anything. Declein pretended not to understand what she was talking about, after which Sylvia handed him the book, saying it was as a thank you, and ran away. The trip had indeed been very tiring, so Declein wanted to get home as soon as possible and rest. During the first attack, Declan took control of the situation, and together with Veron, they managed to rescue the survivors. But during the second attack, the train crashed down and it appears that Veron fell then. However, the VIP carriage in which Declein was located miraculously became suspended on one of the cliffs. Overall, they both did their best to get the situation under control. But Veron fell down during the second attack. Julia learned about this from one of the police officers who arrived at the scene. This loss was painful for Julia, because Veron was her reliable right hand, and she could not even imagine that he would leave her. Meanwhile, in the Declein household, upon Declein's return, things were as restless as ever. Uriel was furious because he had written a check in the family's name again. The thing is, the staff turned out to be much more expensive than he thought. So Declein was forced to write a check out to the family. Uriel also said that at this rate, their finances would only last for 2 months. But Declein asked her to calm down, saying that he knew where to get the money. And when he spoke about a way to get money, he meant the items he bought at auction. At first, Declein didn't understand why the auction items had the aura of a magnate, and thought of them as investments similar to those in the real world. However, just recently, an idea came to his mind, and he realized how to increase his wealth with the help of these items. And for this, Declein used the skill Midas Touch. Uriel didn't quite understand what Declein was planning, and asked him why he was standing with his hand outstretched. Declein said he was going to put the items up for auction again, and asked Uriel to call an appraiser. Uriel was shocked by Declein's idea, saying that these were antiques that were supposed to be kept as long as possible, and that he wouldn't get even half the price for them now. But Declein asked her to keep quiet, which angered her even more. Meanwhile, Declein asked Rose's servant to slowly call the appraiser to him, and then help with the transportation of all these things. Thanks to the Midas touch, objects acquired a completely different meaning, and now the Oriental vase had a special effect. The flowers in it would never fade. They would slowly transform into a new species, and each petal retained the effect of relieving fatigue. Meanwhile, Ifrin and the rest of the guys gathered in the room of the Simple Magic Study Club. The guys were playing cards, and the winner didn't have to clean the club room, so Ifrin had 3 wins in a row, so she didn't have to clean for a week. For her, it all seemed like a dream. She came from a baron's family, but she didn't even graduate from the academy. And from the moment she entered this tower, she received an endless stream of hatred directed at her. And it wasn't just the students who were talking about her. Even the professors didn't like her. As a result, she had to go through a lot. But who would have thought that she would be sitting like this in a club with her friends? But of course, there were some unpleasant situations. And suddenly Professor Relin came to them, to whom Becca reported that the guys were doing something they shouldn't in the club room. And since their club studied simple magic, few people understood why it existed, calling it nonsense. In response to Relin's complaints, Ifrin said that they had filled out all the necessary documents, received permission to create the club, and that one of the professors had given them their consent. Relin's indignation continued unabated, and he was curious to know who, in his words, had the sense to approve the creation of such a useless club. Meanwhile, Relin also called Ifrin the same commoner who was recently at the disciplinary council, which angered her. Relin did not hide his hatred for commoners, trying in every way to offend them, and also demanded that Ifrin name the professor who approved the creation of the club. At that moment, Declein happened to be passing by them, and, having heard their conversation, he could not pass by. Declein explained to Uriel that it was he who had given the boys his permission, and in the meantime asked if he had any objections. Declein himself was furious, because Uriel hadn't left him alone since the morning, and now that he was at work, someone else was causing him problems. However, in Declein's presence, Relin acted differently and merely asked him if the place seemed too shabby. He also said that the mages from the Imperial Academy's magic tower deserved better equipment and furniture, and it saddened him greatly to see everything in such a state, so he would take it upon himself to replace the items with newer ones. Declein didn't dwell on the subject for long, merely noting that Relin was quite polite and that the room did indeed look old and shabby. Before leaving, looking at Becca, Declein said that worthless cockroaches will always behave as befits insects. After some time, Declein finally gave his first lecture since leaving for Burke, and all the students were curious about what had happened there. Many people were whispering about the incident with the train, and the only one who knew the whole truth besides Declein was Sylvia, but she decided to remain silent. Nevertheless, Declein asked for silence and announced the beginning of a lecture, the topic of which was pure elements and magical interference. Magical interference is when one magician's spell is interrupted by another's intervention. Before moving on to the main part of the lecture, Declein invited the students to begin with a warm-up exercise. After this, the students watched a beautiful and vibrant spectacle that was truly captivating. Declein explained that these magic stones were worth 3,000 eln each. He would leave them hanging in the air, and the students would try to take them by interfering with his telekinesis. And if they succeed, they will be able to keep the stones for themselves. This could not but please the students. However, for the spellcaster, blocking interference is just as important as casting the spell itself. And while the defender certainly has an advantage in this situation, it's still worth a try for students. After Declein announced the start, the students began trying to take the magic stones by interfering with his telekinesis. Last time, Declein managed to stop and lift the train into the air, but he only recently learned basic telekinesis and needs to use it more often to get used to it. He was also interested, even though they were just students, to see how long his telekinesis could last against 150 mages. But the most interesting thing is whether he can cope against kids with top-level talent. Ifrin was genuinely happy with this opportunity to earn some extra money, as her sponsorship funds had practically run out after she spent them on textbooks, supplies, and other things. Seeing how hard Ifrin was trying, Sylvia decided not to give up either. However, despite Declein withstanding the onslaught of 150 mages at once, no one was able to break through his defense, and the students seemed unable to interfere at all. Declein himself was also surprised because he didn't expect that the students would hold out until the very end, using up all their strength, and that this would not yield any results. But this did not last long. And although it was obvious, nevertheless, the first one who managed to take away the magic stone was Sylvia. Declein, of course, expected that Sylvia would succeed. And at the same time, he was surprised that no one else had succeeded. But after these words, Ifrin also managed to break through Declein's telekinesis and take away the magic stone, thereby earning 3,000 eln. The rest of the students, no matter how hard they tried, were unable to complete Declein's task. Declein felt very sorry for them, so he asked the students to stop, and also to clean up the mess. Julia asked Ifrin how she managed to do it, and she replied that she had some kind of epiphany. She doesn't know much about telekinesis, but when she tried to break through Declein's magic, it felt like something broke. Sylvia was confused and thought it was impossible since Ifrin had received the lowest grade in the previous exam. But now, she was already second. She was sure that Ifrin wasn't given any special treatment, but it seemed that the rumors about Declan staying late from work because of Ifrin's classes were true. Sylvia was angry, not understanding why Declein lied to her and why he chose Ifrin, calling her arrogant. After a short warm-up, Declein continued his lecture, explaining to the students that in this practical exercise, they had made every effort to achieve magical interference. But there was an easier way to counter his telekinesis, and perhaps those who have managed to cope have already realized this. And this method is mana interference. Mana interference, unlike the more common method of blocking detected magic, is a method that involves understanding another person's spell and interrupting it. However, the reason this method is not universal is that it has too many limitations. Declein also explained to the students that its use was only possible with the magic they had learned, and that it was not recommended for use, as experience showed that barriers or other spells were more often used for protection. However, nothing gathers water, and they must use this opportunity to fully understand the interference of mana, because the trick of the technique is to find the central chain of the magic circle. The central chain is a part of the magic circle. Its appearance depends on the type of spell and the element used in the spell. In other words, you need to understand what central chain the opponent is using and interfere with it. If the students could master this mana technique, it would be much easier for them to perform magical interference. And to begin with, he would like to teach them to distinguish the central circuits of most magic circles. Before this, he asked the students to pay attention to the magic circle for the spell called Storm Spear Blade. It contains a destructive type of magic that will always have a central chain that will explode from the inside. Then Declan explained to them the principle of support spells, and despite the huge amount of information, the students tried to remember everything he said. Declein didn't even notice how 2 whole hours had passed since the beginning of the lecture, and decided to finish the lecture despite the fact that there was still material to be analyzed, but time was up. He decided to leave the rest of the material for their own analysis, so that they could reflect on it and understand it themselves. While he also mentioned that there would soon be a midterm assessment, and before that, an open practical exam. Some students were glad that the lecture had finally come to an end, but others were unhappy that Declein had stopped halfway and just left like that. Ifrin felt as if a revelation had come to her, and the feeling was difficult to describe in words. Meanwhile, Beck approached her. He resembled Declein in appearance and behavior, showed hatred towards Ifrin, and called her a representative of the common people. Julia decided not to stand aside, and asked him why he had started calling her names again, as if he wanted to start a fight lately. Beck noted that it was all because of their showing off, as if they were commoners, and meanwhile asked Ifrin what she had done to go from being the last in the class to being the second. Ifrin wanted to simply ignore him, but Beck asked her how she was able to bribe Declan even though she did not belong to a noble family and was not wealthy. This took Ifrin by surprise, and Beck later added that everyone already knew that she attended private lessons with the professor. Ifrin denied it, saying it wasn't true, but Beck continued to insist on it, saying she was just a fool who hadn't even graduated from the academy. Beck also suggested that perhaps Declein simply felt sorry for her, since it looked like he wanted to give her the Mana Stone as a gift. Beck went too far and completely stopped thinking about what he was saying, and as soon as he started talking about Ifrin's past and her parents, the girl immediately lost her temper. His words angered Ifrin so much that she was ready to hit him in front of the other students. However, Julia stopped her in time, saying that she could be punished again, and remembering Declein's words that magicians should always remain calm, Ifrin calmed down. Ifrin smiled and thanked Julia, saying that it looked like she had been a little overworked. In the end, everything ended with a small verbal altercation, and, fortunately, it did not come to blows. Nevertheless, anger filled Ifrin, and even after a long time, she still wanted to take revenge on Beck for all his dirty words. Meanwhile, while walking around the campus, Ifrin suddenly bumped into Sylvia and was surprised by such a meeting. Sylvia was just waiting for Ifrin to talk to her alone. However, her question was quite sharp and irritated Ifrin, because, oddly enough, Sylvia asked her if she really was receiving extra lessons from Declan. This angered Ifrin, and she told her everything she thought about this situation, saying that she and Declein were in a terrible relationship, so there was no way he could be her tutor. After this, Sylvia was convinced that Ifrin was telling the truth. And in the meantime, she also asked her if she had heard why Declein had entered the laboratory for the first time in 3 years since her father's death. Ifrin confidently stated that Declein could not possibly have gone there because he would never be able to repeat her father's work. Because, after all, her father was a genius. To which Sylvia replied that in that case, she should know that Declein had been visiting the lab every day for the past 3 months, and that he had also cleaned it up, hired an assistant, and brought in new magical tools. Ifrin, listening to this, could not believe that Declein had really taken up her father's developments again, but he was not capable of continuing his research on his own. However, she told Sylvia that she didn't know about it. Maybe Declan just decided to do something of his own, and besides, what did it have to do with her? And that was the end of their conversation. A few days later, Declein gave another lecture. This time the guys gathered not in the classroom, but outside. And Beck, as always, tried in every way to irritate Ifrin and Julia. Declein asked for silence and announced the beginning of the lecture, explaining to the students that, as he had promised, Today, they would have their last practical exam before the midterm assessment. And today's lecture will be a public practice. In front of an audience, students will engage in a magical duel. They can use any magic they are familiar with against each other, but they will be required to demonstrate at least 3 forms of pure elemental magic during the battle. Moreover, no matter whether they win or lose, Declein will evaluate the fight itself, and while observing them, he will write down their strengths and weaknesses. Meanwhile, Professor Relin will also be present to ensure that no one gets seriously injured, and therefore the fights will take place without restrictions. After this, the first fight began, and at first, everything went quite smoothly. At first, the students were awkward due to their lack of combat experience, but eventually they managed to concentrate and use their magic. And of course, the difference in strength between the students was noticeable to the naked eye. Some guys like Beck continued to mock the commoners, saying that they didn't deserve to study in the magic tower. However, Ifrin continued to support the guys no matter what. Meanwhile, it was Beck's turn to choose his opponent to fight, and oddly enough, he chose Ifrin. Ifrin herself was also happy with this outcome, because it was an excellent chance for her to take revenge on Beck for all his dirty remarks about her. Even though Beck kept trying to irritate her, Ifrin remained calm and alert to prove to everyone that Beck's magic was trash compared to hers. However, the start of the fight was quite problematic for Ifrin at first glance, and Beck managed to attack her. Beck thought that the battle would end there and he would be able to easily win. But that was not the case. Suddenly, the tide of the fight changed, and Beck no longer looked so confident of his victory. And in the end, Ifrin was able to defeat Beck without much difficulty, and she couldn't help but take the chance to mock him. Declein noted that the fight ended too quickly because some idiot couldn't take a punch properly, which meant there wasn't even a proper show for the invited guests. Ifrin asked to give her another opponent, because due to the fact that Beck turned out to be too weak, she was still unable to use the 3 forms of pure elemental magic. Declein replied that this was indeed the case, and that it would be wrong to end the examination in this way. So he wanted to choose the next opponent for her. However, Ifrin, pointing at Declein, declared that she wanted to fight him. This caused a surprised and violent reaction. Relin also did not ignore such a statement and said that Ifrin was crossing all boundaries. For Ifrin, this was a long-awaited opportunity to fight Declein. And even if she missed this chance, it wouldn't be a problem for her to be ridiculed for a while. Nevertheless, Declein himself replied that he was not against such a duel and accepted Ifrin's challenge, since, as he himself had previously stated, there were no restrictions on this exam. But be that as it may, the professor will not be able to fight on equal terms with the student, so Ifrin will attack first. Ifrin's heart fluttered at this moment. Finally, after a long time, she was able to fight with Declein. This was the very moment she had been waiting for so long. Of course, she understood that she would be unable to do anything against an opponent who was superior to her in strength. She also understood that there was no point in this fight. And yet, Ifrin could not help but take advantage of this opportunity to close the gap between her and the man she would one day defeat. Declein was quite surprised by Ifrin's strength, and it was clear that she was giving it her all. However, her strength was still woefully insufficient to defeat Declein or even injure him. Even though she didn't succeed with her first attack, Ifrin didn't give up and continued to attack him. Meanwhile, Declein told Ifrin that she had a certain habit when using magic. It becomes more noticeable when the movements of her magic become wider. As a result, Ifrin did not notice how Declein used magical interference against her again, causing her to no longer be able to use magic against him. However, even so, Ifrin did not give up and fought to the last. And since she could no longer use magic, she decided to defeat him with physical force. But in the end, it only took one flick from Declein to send Ifrin far away into the battlefield. Declein noted that the effective combination of pure fire and wind elements, as well as the use of earth magic to create a dust explosion triggered by her magic sense, was incredible. But even if her instincts were excellent, it would be impossible to pull off what she was trying to do, provided that her dexterity did not exceed Declein's mastery of the elements. And the reason she was able to perform like that is because of Ifrin's vessel talent, the ability to use all kinds of elements when she wears this bracelet. Approaching Ifrin, Declan said that, unfortunately, the result was obvious. But even so, her performance was not bad. After which, Declein announced the end of the public practice, and the students will have to concentrate on the upcoming midterm assessment. At the same time, Ganesha met with her old friends, and among them was Uriel, an island girl played by Woojin's ex-girlfriend, Ada. However, Uriel was no longer a normal game character and suffered the same fate as Declein. Or rather, on the night that Woojin entered the game and became Declan, Ara noticed a strange, bright light on the way to the car. This bright light consumed and erased her, and then the sounds of her world disappeared completely. And when she opened her eyes again, there was no trace left of her original world. So she woke up in the game. The first thing she saw was Ganesha, who was saying something about Declan and his plan to use gifted children. Even though everything around them looked strange and unfamiliar, Ganesha and the other guys looked familiar. And that's not strange, because these are characters and a story that she herself worked on creating. At that moment, Ada realized that she had somehow miraculously been transported into the game, and now she was Uriel. And since Ganesha was the most powerful traveler in this world, Uriel decided that the best decision would be to stay with her. After all, she simply has to survive and find a way to get out of this game. Meanwhile, Declein finally received his staff, which he had been waiting for so long, and with the help of which he wanted to become even stronger. The staff even had special attributes. It independently helped the user understand magic, as well as use it more effectively. And the wand could be repainted to match the color of the clothes. Moreover, due to the blood of the Declein family, the staff allowed one to use enormous power, with the help of which one can drive out or neutralize demons. And the staff itself cost Declein 9 million elni. Meanwhile, Roy knocked on Declein's door to warn him that his dinner was ready. Seeing the dinner that awaited him, Declein was quite surprised, because Uriel had previously said that their financial situation was not the best. Uriel herself said that they needed to eat well to overcome difficulties, so she asked to cook this for him so that he would be full of energy. This is because they did manage to sell the antiques that Declein had ordered sold off, and those items were in great demand. And it got to the point where the auction house started having difficulties. Uriel and Roy even thought that it was all a dream, because the funds they received had reached such a level that they would no longer have to worry about the estate for several years. This outcome of events could not but please Declein and the rest of the Declein family. A little later in his office, Declein was preparing for a midterm assessment and was angry with his game character. After all, he had now put a lot of effort into composing questions for the exam, and in order to get ideas for questions, he decided to look at previous tests that Declein had given. And all these questions were impossibly difficult for ordinary students, which once again confirmed how arrogant Declein really was. Woojin realized that the original Declein had confused the need to make the tests more difficult with showing off his own superiority over others. And that was why such unsolvable tests were created. But he didn't do that, and he wanted to choose good questions. Questions that weren't the easiest to solve. Questions that made you feel proud of yourself after completing them. They should be like that, sparking an interest in understanding magic. Every action Declein took as a professor could play a key role in the development of new mages. So much depended on him. After some time, he reached the last box, and the questions in it were already noticeably different from those, as if they had been written by a completely different person. And even despite their high complexity, they could spark genuine interest. Using understanding, Declein recognized the essence of these questions. So he realized that if he poured the solution onto the trial answer sheet for the magic exam, incredible magic would occur. After which, the office was filled with a bright and mesmerizing phenomenon: the incredible beauty of magic. Moreover, an unknown woman appeared in front of Declein, which surprised him greatly. Declein realized that this was an exam in which one had to solve problems, and by pouring in the correct answer, one could obtain an image. The colors shown are the elements, and the solution is in harmony with all the questions in the exam and is truly admirable. This is the most appropriate question on the topic of understanding pure elements. Woojin realized that Declein himself probably also realized how wonderful this task was. It was so magnificent that with his talents, he would not be able to recreate such a question. It was instinctive envy. But what interested him most was what kind of woman appeared before him. Meanwhile, the Council of Professors received a letter from the great elder Burke Declein, in which he warned that the issue of the purple-born race would be discussed at the next meeting. Adelina was surprised that the discussion about the Scarlet-born had turned into this, and all because of the strong desire to suppress them. What was even more surprising to her was that the letter spoke about Professor Declein. And looking at the other professors, She declared that this also applied to them. Adelina was the head of the Imperial University's Magic Tower, and as a promising Archmage candidate, she possesses terrifying power. However, her character is surprisingly extremely simple and playful. Her interest in the world around her and her love of rumors are connected to the secret of her birth. After all, Adelina is actually half-elf, which explains her character, and of course, this is the source of her unimaginable magical power. And even a person like her, albeit reluctantly, is forced to wait for a day like today. Once a month, all the professors gathered to show respect to the chairwoman. And as always, the one absent from the meeting was Declein. And his excuse was that a member of the Declein family didn't need to impress anyone anyway. But this time, in his absence, one very interesting phrase was said. The upcoming Conference of Magicians was attended by Miss Luina, a woman who once competed with Declein for the post of senior professor, after which she resigned of her own free will due to the machinations that Declein carried out. Adelina was sure that Luina would never return to the kingdom, and yet she wondered why she suddenly decided to visit the Empire again. Ratlin noted that as soon as the position of senior professor became vacant, Luina would return in the blink of an eye. And if that happened, it would be a huge boost to the strength of their magic tower. He also couldn't help but mention Declein, saying that, unlike him, who took on the task of protecting the Crimsonborn, Luina would be better suited for this role. Adelina promised to think about it if Luina did return, and after that, the meeting was adjourned. Adelina, meanwhile, was surprised at how much Declein had changed recently. And besides, the questions he had given for the exam were too well done to believe that he had written them himself. That's why Adelina was thinking about annoying Declan a little. And if Luina, Declan's sworn enemy, showed up, it would be real fun, which she would like to watch. A few days later, the long-awaited day of the midterm assessment for Understanding the Magic of Pure Elements arrived. The students were quite surprised when they received the exam assignment, and some even considered giving up. Alan noted that the questions were presented in a non-standard format, so he understands the students' confusion, but all the assignments were written in accordance with the materials covered. In addition, the midterm assessment for Understanding the Magic of Pure Elements will take place over the course of 10 days, and the deadline is midnight on Sunday before the Magic Tower closes. Alan also told the students that each of them would be assessed in a room specifically designated for them, and that they would of course be allowed to take other exams while they were completing these assignments. Of course, they are allowed to eat and sleep during this time, but they are not allowed to take exam assignments out of the room. And as he said earlier, any study materials can be used in this exam. Alan also conveyed to them that Declein had said that he would personally be willing to write a letter of recommendation for them on behalf of a senior professor if the student achieved a perfect score. This motivated the boys because the magical table of ranks begins with first-class mages, archmages, and it goes all the way up to the 11th grade magicians, the students, but climbing it is not at all easy. Getting a higher rank simply by attending classes and waiting for a while won't work, as each rank requires a promotion test, and passing this very test is not an easy task at all. However, if such a student happens to have a letter of recommendation from Declan, a 4th rank monarch mage, it can be considered a direct ticket to promotion. Ifrin thought it was some kind of nonsense. Would her sworn enemy really give her a recommendation? It killed all her motivation to try hard on the exam, since she didn't want to be connected to him in any way. But at the same time, if she really managed to get a top score and get a recommendation from Declan, she would be able to climb higher up the ranks and make Declan her servant. Or so she thought. A lot of time has passed since the exam began, and the 4th day has already arrived. At this time, Ifrin was mildly confused and perplexed because the exam turned out to be much more difficult. She already had a whole stack of calculations, all to solve the problem. However, despite the difficulty of the tasks, Ifrin found them very interesting and even magnificent. The process itself was pure agony, but when she found the answer, it was as if an enlightenment descended upon her that she had never experienced before. She even found it hard to believe that these questions had been composed by Declein himself, and the joy of research did not allow her to stop, despite the agony. Ifrin was determined and confident to earn a perfect score to earn Declan's recommendation, but she came across a question she didn't know how to answer. So she decided to take a short break. In order to clear her head a little, Ifrin decided to go out for some fresh air. But she wasn't the only one who had this desire. Sylvia spent about 30 hours on a single question and finally solved it. Meanwhile, she considered the words about Declein's recommendation to be nonsense, because anyone who could earn the highest score on this exam would under no circumstances fail the promotion exam. And yet, she wanted to earn the maximum score not for the sake of a recommendation, but for herself. Sylvia found these questions beautiful, as if each one were a key leading to a unique insight. Therefore, Sylvia thought that if she could solve them all, she could be sure that she would become stronger as a mage. Meanwhile, she and Ifrin accidentally bumped into each other, and they were both pleasantly surprised to see each other. And the only question that interested them in each other was how many questions they had solved. Ifrin and Sylvia said this at the same time, which made them feel awkward for a moment. Sylvia decided to answer first, and said that she was stuck on the 8th question. But Ifrin was surprised because she was also stuck on a question, but on the 7th. However, Sylvia was even more surprised because she couldn't believe that Ifrin was only one question behind her, and even thought that she was lying. They didn't have a chance to talk for long because immediately after that, Sylvia left, deciding not to waste another minute of time. While the exam was in full swing in the tower, Declein felt that a great storm was about to arrive, and his instincts did not fail him. From the news, he learned that Emperor Krebheim was in critical condition. Krebheim was known for his gentle and calm nature, and therefore always strove for a balance between divine and imperial authority. He also did not apply a hostile policy towards the Purple-born, and the problem is who became the new emperor after his death. This ruler is the most important figure in the world, and also the most problematic, and her name is Sophian Ekateri August von Gebrein. And it looks like big changes are about to happen in this world. Meanwhile, the last day of the exam arrived, and during this period, there were many students who abandoned the marathon exam. However, the line between the weak and the strong was too obvious. And yet, even without grades, all the students boasted that they passed the exam, as if it were a medal. After the exam, the students did not enjoy their freedom, but instead reflected on what they had learned. It was unusual and attracted everyone's attention. Even the professors of the Magic Tower wanted to take a look at that very exam question that was shrouded in rumors. And right now, the number of students trying to solve the last 8th question is only 2. Ifrin was sure that she would be able to solve it. She just needed to concentrate a little more. When suddenly, something strange happened. At that moment, an incredibly bright and mesmerizing light was seeping through the door of one of the rooms, which was impossible to ignore. Declein knew from the very beginning who would be able to solve the last task first, so he wasn't too surprised. The first person to solve the final 8th question on the exam was Sylvia, for which Declein successfully congratulated her. There was a real beauty of magic in her room, and all this is the answer to the last question. Bright colors filled with magical elements. Even the cool blues had a warmth to them, and under the stars that shine with hope in the darkness, they are both hot and cold at the same time, dazzling yet sharp. It was a true masterpiece of Sylvia's magic and skill. And although these questions were composed by Declein himself, he was unable to realize such beauty, probably due to a lack of skill. Behind this same question was hidden Woojin himself, who dreamed of becoming an artist. But he had no talent. But even so, he wanted to touch people's hearts with his works and continued to pursue art. This was the same Woojin. Declein's sense of aesthetics was also woven into this issue, which is why Declein, who loves beauty, and Woojin, who dreamed of going to art school, both found solace in what was happening. After all this, Declein thanked Sylvia and left. Sylvia also wanted to thank him because it was thanks to this question that she realized how beautiful magic is in itself. Ifrin, no matter how hard she tried, was unable to solve the last task. And besides, the time allotted for the exam had run out. However, despite the failure, Ifrin continued to smile. Of course, she was upset that she was unable to get ahead of Sylvia and earn the highest score. But what was more interesting to her was that, without even noticing it, she had stopped thinking about the letter of recommendation and Declein. As a result, only her magical curiosity and indescribable thirst for knowledge remained. Even though the exam was already over, Ifrin still wanted to continue trying to solve the last question. But in the end, having spent a lot of effort, she was still unable to solve it. But she would have felt some satisfaction if she could answer the last question. And what upset her even more was that after such a difficult exam, A door with offensive graffiti and a cold bed awaited her. However, at that moment, she saw the guys from the club coming towards her. Julia and the guys were waiting for Ifrin because, as they had planned, they were supposed to relax together after the exam. For example, have a tasty meal. This moment truly meant a lot to Ifrin because for the first time in a long time, she could finally feel not alone. After a few days, Ifrin finally managed to find the answer to the last question, and she did not regret spending so much time on it. After that, Ifrin enjoyed carefree days without exams in the company of friends from the club. Ifrin was glad that she passed that exam, because it was the most incredible moment she had ever had. Meanwhile, Julia asked her if she had heard the recent news about Declein, since there had been a huge stir after his questions at the exam. Julia also told Ifrin that they were saying that Declein had been called away somewhere. To be more precise, to the floating island. The floating island floats at an altitude of 1,500 meters, representing the pinnacle of magical engineering and the magical community as a whole. Rumor has it that all knowledge and magic are contained on the island. It is the future of their world, and moreover, it is an autonomous region, inaccessible to ground systems. And naturally, quite eccentric people obsessed with magic gather there. Some mages highly appreciated the questions that Declein had compiled, and it soon became the most discussed topic on the floating island. Because of this, Declein was invited to the island to give a lecture on the topics raised in the questions. Declein himself did not expect that this exam would become so popular. And yet, he also received a quest to give a lecture on the floating island, for the successful completion of which he would receive 30 mana points. Moreover, the payment for one performance is not small. In Korean won, it is about 1 billion. So he even seriously considered this option for development. Declein greeted everyone cheerfully and began his lecture, the topic of which was the University Tower Midterm Exam. The lecture itself will only take 2 hours to complete. And before moving on to the exam questions, Declein began with a brief explanation of pure elements. However, not everyone credited Declein for the genius of these questions, such as Ruina von Schlott-McQueen, who considered these assignments to be plagiarism. The lecture was more than successful, and before moving on to the assignments, Declein used the materials from previous lectures to facilitate understanding. Declein did this to ensure that everyone present was focused on the new, systematic explanations. And when he moved on to the 6th task, the most interesting part began. Adelina couldn't contain her curiosity, so she asked what, based on the above, would happen if they made a distinction between pure magic and species magic. She was curious to know how, in that case, to best combine the elements from the 6th task to obtain the best type of destructive magic. Declein wasn't surprised that Adelina was being cheeky to him even here. After all, she does have a mischievous side, and given how Declein had behaved in the past, it wasn't surprising that she suspected him of ghostwriting. That's why he decided to play along with her a little, in order to spice up his lecture. He explained that to do this, it was necessary to add the basic diagram in a linear form like this. After this, the flow of questions from Adelina did not stop, as if this lecture was only for her. However, thanks to Declein's knowledge, he answered each of her questions with ease. Thanks to the intense gaze of the mages, who considered her a nuisance distracting the lecturer, Adelina calmed down a little. As a result, he spent too much time on Adelina's questions, which left only 10 minutes. So he decided not to go into details of the last task. After this, a very interesting, albeit provocative, question came from the audience. Ruina asked Declan if it was true that he himself had composed the 8th question. In response, Declein asked her to clarify what exactly she meant by this. Ruina stated that she had made herself clear. She was interested to know whether he had really composed the 8th question himself. After this, heated discussions began among the mages about whether Ruina suspected Declein of ghostwriting. In response to Ruina's question, Declein calmly and confidently replied that drawing inspiration from others is natural. However, Declein declared that every task in this exam was composed by him personally, after which the audience shone with the bright and beautiful light of his magic. He also asked if Ruina was satisfied with this answer, and despite all her dissatisfaction, she could not object. After this, the lecture was successfully completed, and in the meantime, Declein completed the quest. According to the plot, there is a bad relationship between Declein and Ruina, but today everything went relatively smoothly, but something will happen soon. Meanwhile, on the way, Declan bumped into an unfamiliar girl and he was instantly overcome by the feeling that he had seen her somewhere before. And to tell the truth, this meeting was unexpected and strange for him. The girl's name was Charlotte. Declein had studied with her at the university. He extended his hand to her to greet her. However, Charlotte asked him if they were close enough to call each other by their first names, to which Declein asked her how Princess Maho was doing. Woojin didn't care what the relationship was between Declein and Charlotte. He was more interested in Princess Maho, whom she was protecting. After all, Emperor Krabeim will die very soon, and this event will become a turning point in the plot. Many characters in the story will find themselves between life and death, which will lead to new clashes. And Declan, in turn, must save the life of a character named Maho, one of the characters created by Woojin, who is given an important role in the plot, as she can positively influence the outcome of the mission in the second half of the game. The princess's origins complicate matters considerably, as she is second in line to the throne of the Uriel Republic, and third in line to the throne of the Locke Empire. People like her always have a trail of blood and war behind them, and she is currently in the Empire under the pretext of studying. But as soon as the current emperor dies, she will leave the Empire, which will put her life in danger. Charlotte was displeased with Declein's insolence, saying that he had not at all gotten rid of the habit of picking on insults, even in elementary conversation, to which Declein told her not to get worked up because he would become the vanguard, ready at any moment to protect his comrades who had put their lives on the line. Before leaving, Declein gave Charlotte a magical negotiating ball, asking her to contact him when she decided what to do next. Of course, at first she didn't want to accept his help, but in the end, she agreed. Meanwhile, the princess also came to her and was concerned about Charlotte's anxious appearance, telling her not to give in to stress. Maho noted that the brothers' subjects would soon arrive here and try to either use her for their own purposes or kill her. But she herself did not understand who would need this throne. After all, Maho ran away to the Empire, citing her studies. But in fact, she really liked living here, and besides, it was safe here. However, she understood that the future emperor would not leave her alone, so they needed to escape as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Maho handed Charlotte a suitcase with the money she had managed to save, but she didn't quite understand what it was for. Maho noted that she knew that after paying the mercenaries who would accompany them on their way back, her pockets were completely empty. But Charlotte denied this, saying that she was able to earn money herself. However, the princess could not be persuaded, and she also asked Charlotte not to take everything on herself alone. After all, this money is intended for everyone, so she can consider it her investment. Charlotte was sympathetic to Maho and said that she would use the money to hire as many people as possible to protect her. Meanwhile, through the window, she saw a strange man who was watching them, but not with good intentions. However, after Charlotte saw him, he immediately ran away, and this meant only one thing: that with every minute, it was becoming more and more dangerous here. That's why Charlotte decided to seriously consider Declein's help. Meanwhile, Declein was enthusiastically reading books, and Uriel was walking around, pestering him with questions about why he had suddenly become so interested in books. But he ignored her. Uriel also mentioned that she heard about his lecture on the floating island, and that he made a lot of money. Then Declein replied that she would not get a penny of it. But be that as it may, Uriel did not come to him for this. She told Declein that they had received an official request that graduates of the university's magic tower wanted to visit their territory, Hadacane, as a trip. Declein answered no without thinking, saying that it was not customary to clean up after yourself on such trips, so he was against it. However, Uriel did not back down and asked Declein to at least read their request. Besides, they weren't letting them in for free. At the same time, Declein asked her to leave quickly, and he said this with a very frightening expression on his face. After which Uriel left, although she did not understand why he drove her away so abruptly. The reason why Declein suddenly told Uriel to leave was because Charlotte contacted him at that moment. Charlotte told Declein that they needed to leave immediately because of the impending danger, but they had almost no time, so she asked him for help. Declein immediately agreed, saying that then she would have to follow his every word, explaining that the princess had only one way to get outside the borders of the empire. The route was very dangerous, and at the same time, this makes it the most reliable of all. This is the Crevice Canyon. Charlotte asked him if he was joking, since this place was filled to the brim with demonic energy. Declein asked her if she really thought that by choosing the easiest path, she would be able to turn away from the path to her own destruction. For this reason, Declein asked Charlotte to trust him and dare to cross the Crevice Canyon.